Chapter 1. The White Lie and the Black Suit. The lie hadn't been planned. That was the truly pathetic part. It had simply slipped out, oiled by cheap champagne and the most expensive suit Elara Hayes had ever seen in person. It was the annual St. Jude's Hospital Benefactors Gala, an event Elara normally avoided like an antibiotic-resistant strain of C. difficile. She was a Ph.D., not an M.D. Her world was the humming fluorescence of the basement biochemistry lab, a place of sterile solitude and the beautiful, predictable logic of protein folding. She didn't do people, especially not the walking, talking portfolios of luxury real estate and private equity, who air-kissed and wore diamonds the size of her test tubes. But her boss, Dr. Peterson, a man whose entire personality was a beige cardigan, had insisted. "We need to show our donors what their money does, Hayes. These aren't just donors. They're angel investors in human health. They run hedge funds. They're malpractice attorneys. They sell cybersecurity to the government. They want to see ROI, even if it's just good PR. Put on a dress. Try not to talk about cell necrosis." So here she was, in a borrowed midnight blue dress that felt one deep breath away from structural failure, hiding behind a potted ficus and contemplating the physics of canapes. And then he'd walked in. The entire, chattering, champagne-sipping room hadn't just quieted, it had flexed. It bent around his presence like light around a black hole. He was tall, with hair as black as a fresh-poured espresso, and a face that looked like it had been carved from unforgiving, beautiful marble. He wore a black suit, so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second, more dangerous skin. He moved with a lethal, predatory grace, the kind of man who didn't just own a custom-tailored suit, but probably the insurance policy on the entire building. His eyes, a startling cold gray, swept the room once, cataloging, assessing, and dismissing everyone, until they landed on her. Hiding behind the ficus, Elara had promptly choked on a shrimp puff. He'd moved toward her, not fast, but with an unnerving inevitability. He'd plucked the champagne flute from her trembling hand before she dropped it. "Breathing is generally recommended at these functions, Dottoressa," he'd murmured. His voice was a low, velvet gravel that vibrated straight down her spine. And that had been the moment. The Dottoressa. He'd heard someone, a fawning hospital administrator, a man whose job was 50% healthcare administration and 50% begging wealth management firms for donations, greet her earlier. Dr. Hayes! So glad our research division could join us." The administrator had, of course, meant doctor, as in Ph.D. This man, this walking Armani-clad sin, clearly heard doctor as in M.D. Elara, who could map the human genome from memory, but couldn't execute a simple social interaction, had looked up into those storm-gray eyes. She'd felt the magnetic pull of him, a gravitational force she was utterly unprepared for. He smelled like expensive whiskey, clean soap, and something anciently metallic, like cold steel. She wanted to impress him. She wanted him to keep looking at her with that focused, unnerving intensity. So she hadn't corrected him. She'd just blushed, taken the flute back, and said, "It's the formaldehyde, tends to dry out the throat." A ghost of a smile had touched his lips. It was the most terrifying, thrilling thing she had ever seen. A morbid sense of humor. "I approve." He'd introduced himself, his name a low rumble, Dante Volkov. Dante, as in Inferno. She'd heard the name whispered in the financial pages, Volkov Asset Management, a private investment firm known for aggressive, near-hostile takeovers. It suited him. They'd talked for 10 minutes. Or rather, he'd interrogated her with a series of quiet, penetrating questions about her research, its data analytics requirements, its potential for pharmaceutical development she'd parried with witty, panicked deflections. The chemistry between them wasn't a spark. It was a downed power line, sizzling and lethal on the wet pavement. He'd been about to say something else, his eyes fixed on her mouth when a mountain in a suit had appeared and whispered in his ear. Dante's expression had shuddered, the charm vanishing into cold authority. He'd nodded, then looked back at her. "Dr. Hayes." He'd said it like a promise and a threat, and then he was gone. That had been a week ago. A week Elara had spent replaying the encounter in her head while aggressively autoclaving beakers. It was a fantasy. A bizarre, luxury brand-scented hallucination. Men like Dante Volkov didn't exist in her world of centrifuges and SaaS-based modeling software, which is why, when her lab door hissed open on Tuesday afternoon, she didn't even look up from her microscope. "Peterson, I swear if you ask me about the grant proposal or the business loan for the new sequencer again, I will replace your hand sanitizer with glycerol," she muttered, focused on the delicate dance of a misfolded protein. A deep, amused chuckle answered her. It was not Peterson. "I doubt Mr. Volkov would appreciate that. He's quite particular about his hygiene." Elara froze. The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone... It was the sound of expensive suits and zero patience. She spun her stool around. 2 men stood in the doorway of her sterile, safe lab. They were enormous. Not just tall, but broad, solid blocks of muscle and tailoring. They looked less like men and more like high-end asset protection, like the kind of consultants you hire for a messy merger and acquisition. The man on the left, who had a faint scar bisecting his eyebrow, consulted his phone. "Dr. Elara Hayes?" That's me. Ph.D., technically." Elara's heart hammered. "Not the save-your-life kind, more the stare-at-yeast kind, unless you have a very sick, yeast." Her laugh died in her throat. The men did not laugh. The scarred one, Scar, nodded to his partner. "Suit." Suit stepped into the lab. His eyes scanned her workbench, lingering for a moment on a bubbling beaker. "Mr. Volkov requires your medical expertise," Scar said. His voice was flat. Elara's blood didn't just run cold, it flash froze. "Dante Volkov? Oh no, I think there's been a mistake. See, at the gala..." "There is no mistake," Scar interrupted. "You are Dr. Hayes. He requires a doctor." "But I'm not that kind of doctor," Elara flailed, pointing a latex-gloved hand at her wall, where her framed Ph.D. diploma hung. "I have a doctorate in biochemistry. I'm in biotech, not emergency medicine. I run data models on protein folding. The closest I've come to a medical emergency is when the vending machine ate my dollar. You need a surgeon, or at least someone with a good health insurance plan." The 2 men exchanged a look. It was a look of such profound, synchronized disinterest in her problems that it was almost impressive. This was a logistical nightmare. This was like a hostile takeover of her life. "He's waiting," Scar said, "but I can't. I have protocols. I'm in the middle of a very sensitive experiment." Elara gestured wildly at her microscope. "My proteins, they're folding. It's not like baking a cake, it's cloud computing terabytes of data." Suit took a step toward her. He was impossibly large, and he still smelled faintly of the outdoors, of cold air and motor oil. He moved with a practiced, heavy grace. "The experiment can wait," he said. His voice was even deeper than Scar's. "No, you don't understand. Mr. Volkov, he needs a real doctor. An MD, a surgeon, someone who knows what a spleen is for." "He asked for you," Scar said, with a note of finality. He held up a hand, and Elara belatedly noticed the black leather glove. "Please, Dottoressa, come with us. Now." The way he said Dottoressa, it wasn't a compliment. It was a cage. Elara looked from Scar to Suit. They weren't asking. Her brain, usually so good at risk assessment, was completely offline. "Right," she said, her voice trembling. She ripped off her latex gloves with a sharp snap. She grabbed her lab coat, then looked at it, laughed hysterically, and threw it back down. My purse, can I just… Suit was already holding her worn leather satchel, having plucked it from her desk. This way, Scar said, holding the lab door open. Elara walked between them, her sneakers squeaking on the polished linoleum. As they passed the front desk, the departmental secretary, Marge, looked up from her gossip magazine, her eyes widening. Elara could only offer a weak, terrified wave. The elevator ride down was silent. Elara's mind was racing. Okay, risk analysis. What's the play? He's sick. He has a cold. Or maybe it's a dermatology thing. I can Google rash. I'm basically a human search engine optimization tool for medical journals. But her gut, the same one that told her when a data set was corrupted, knew it wasn't a rash. They didn't exit into the main lobby. They took the elevator down to the parking garage, to a section reserved for hospital administration that Elara had never seen. A black, glossy sedan, a luxury vehicle that probably cost more than her student loan debt, was waiting, idling silently. Suit opened the back door. Get in, doctor, he said. Elara Hayes, Ph.D., a woman whose greatest talent was making yeast fluoresce, got into the car of the most dangerous man in the city. The lie had just become her reality, and as the door clicked shut with the heavy, definitive thunk of a bank vault, she had a terrible, sinking feeling that her credentials, and maybe her life insurance policy, were about to be examined very, very closely. Chapter 2. The Examination. The ride was suffocatingly silent. Elara sat pin straight in the back of the luxury vehicle, her worn satchel on her lap like a flimsy shield. The upholstery was a soft, buttery leather that probably cost more than her entire Ph.D. program. She stared out the tinted window, watching the familiar, brightly lit streets of the hospital district blur into the gleaming, impersonal towers of downtown. Her mind, usually a neat archive of data points and biochemical pathways, was now a chaotic, high-speed collision of worst-case scenarios. This was a kidnapping. A very polite, well-tailored kidnapping. She wasn't just a fraud, she was a liability. In Dante Volkov's world, she imagined liabilities weren't given severance packages. They were just removed. Like a corrupted file, a bad investment. What had she been thinking? Oh, he's handsome. I'll let him think I'm a surgeon. What an idiot. She was a glorified lab rat who hadn't touched a living human patient since her mandatory CPR certification, which she was pretty sure she'd failed. The car didn't pull up to a curb. It descended into a private, subterranean garage that made the hospital's executive lot look like a public park and ride. The air smelled like curing concrete and expensive ozone. A different set of guards, these ones armed with more than just bored expressions, nodded as the sedan slid past a security checkpoint that looked like a border crossing. This isn't a hospital, Elara thought, her stomach clenching. It's a fortress. The data security here alone was probably military grade. This way, doctor, Suit said, opening her door. They rode another elevator, this one silent and fast, ascending with a pressure change that made Elara's ears pop. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into the largest room she had ever been in. It was a penthouse. But it wasn't warm or luxurious in the way of old money mansions. It was cold, sterile, and brutally modern. Floor-to-ceiling windows spanned 3 entire walls, showcasing a god's-eye view of the city glittering like a spilled jewelry box below. The furniture was all sharp angles, black leather, chrome, and glass. It was less a home and more a statement of power. A bespoke minimalist palace. And he was there. Dante Volkov stood by the farthest window, his back to them, looking out at the city he clearly owned. The playful, charming predator from the gala was gone. This was the man whispered about in the financial pages, the man who orchestrated hostile takeovers before breakfast. Mr. Volkov, Scar announced, and then he and Suit simply vanished. They didn't make a sound. They just retreated, the elevator doors hissing shut, leaving Elara alone with him. For a full 10 seconds, he didn't move. Elara's heart was a trapped bird against her ribs. Then he turned. Slowly. Elara's breath caught. His pristine $1,000 white shirt was ruined. A dark, ugly stain was blooming across his left shoulder and clavicle, soaking the white cotton in a slick, terrifying crimson. His face was pale, carved from stone, but his gray eyes were sharp and ferociously alive. They pinned her to the spot. "Dr. Hayes," he said. His voice was a low, quiet rumble that held no trace of the warmth she remembered. It was the sound of a judge passing sentence. "Mr. Volkov," she squeaked. "You're bleeding." "An astute observation," he said, his voice dripping with dry, cold sarcasm. He took a step toward her, and for the first time, she saw the pain tightening the corners of his mouth. A small business dispute. "You need to go to an ER, she said, the words tumbling out. That's a lot of blood. You need a real surgeon, maybe a vascular specialist. I can call." "You will call no one." He cut her off, his voice dropping to a lethal command. He was closer now, only a few feet away. He was radiating heat, pain, and a terrifying, contained power. "I do not do emergency rooms. I do not do public records. I have a vested interest in privacy. A bullet, as it turns in, creates a significant data security problem." He gestured to a gleaming chrome bar cart in the corner. On it was not a medical kit, but a half-empty bottle of very expensive-looking whiskey, a few towels, and a small black leather box. "My men informed me you were a doctor," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was the presentation of a fact he expected to be true. Elara's entire future, her lab, her research, her life, felt like it was balanced on the head of a pin. She could confess. She could say, "I'm a Ph.D. I study yeast. I'm sorry for the lie," and he would... What? Let her go? A man bleeding in a penthouse fortress? No. He'd see her as a loose end. A worthless asset. Her brain, trained for high-stakes problem-solving, just usually on a microscopic level, kicked into survival mode. She had one play: bluff. Bluff like her life depended on it, because it did. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and channeled every episode of ER she'd ever binge-watched. "Right!" she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp, brittle, and bossy. She marched past him, and dumped her satchel on his $1 billion sofa. "Well, this is not an ideal clinical setting. In fact, this is a medical malpractice nightmare waiting to happen. But you seem to be allergic to hospitals, so we'll make do. Take off your shirt." His eyebrows shot up. A flicker of something. Amusement? Respect? Crossed his features. But he didn't move. "Now, Mr. Volkov," she ordered, walking to the bar cart. "Or would you prefer I cut it off? Because I will. And I promise my technique is not optimized for cosmetic surgery." A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. He winced, his good hand going to the buttons of his shirt. "Bossy, I remember that." "You remember my morbid humor?" she corrected, not looking at him. She opened the black box. Inside, mercifully, was a suture kit. Needle, sterile thread, forceps. It was basic, but it was real. "You're bleeding all over your luxury real estate. Sit down." He sat on a low, black leather chair, his movements tight with pain. He worked the buttons undone, hissing as the fabric pulled at the wound. Finally, he shrugged the shirt off his shoulders, letting it drop to the floor. Elara's brain went entirely, blessedly offline. She had seen muscular men, she'd seen diagrams, she'd seen the sterile academic images in Gray's Anatomy. She had never seen this. Dante Volkov was built like a fallen god. His chest and abdomen were a roadmap of lean, hard muscle, defined and sculpted with a terrifying precision. A light dusting of dark hair tapered down. "Focus, Hayes!" His shoulder was a mess. There was an entry wound, small and dark, and a slightly larger, messier exit wound on his back. A clean-through, as they said in movies. She was so lucky. If the bullet was in him, she'd be dead. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice sounding thin. "It already hurts, Dottoressa," he murmured, and she realized he wasn't watching his own wound. He was watching her. His gray eyes were fixed on her face, analytical, intense, and unnervingly intimate. "Right. Whiskey." She poured a generous amount onto a towel. "This is for the wound, not for you. A pity?" She pressed the whiskey-soaked towel to the entry wound. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, and his entire body went rigid. His free hand clenched into a fist on his knee. But he didn't make another sound. "I need to clean it." "Both sides," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She was touching him. Her bare fingers were brushing against his hot, damp skin. The smell of him, whiskey, blood, and that same clean, metallic, expensive scent, was overwhelming. She moved behind him to clean the exit wound, her body forced to lean in close. Her hair brushed his uninjured shoulder. She felt the heat radiating from his back, felt the coil of hard muscle under her hands. Her breath hitched. He felt it. She knew he did. She felt the tiny, responsive tension in his frame. "You're trembling," he whispered. His voice was a velvet rasp that vibrated through her. "Nervous, doctor. Worried about your first real patient? I'm a terrible risk management prospect." "I'm not trembling," she lied, her voice tight. "I'm cold. And you're quiet." Most people would be screaming, or at least complaining about the lack of anesthesia. "I have a high tolerance for pain." He tilted his head back slightly, trying to look at her. "And a very low tolerance for failure." The threat was there, hanging in the air between them, as potent as the smell of antiseptic. She moved back in front of him, threading the suture needle. Her hands were, in fact, shaking. "Stop it. This is just a complex protein structure. A very large, very hot, very dangerous protein structure." "This is the part," she said, her voice a strained whisper, "where you're supposed to bite down on a leather belt or something." "I'll manage." His eyes never left her face. "Do your job, doctor." She took a breath and made the first stitch. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just watched her. His gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. A brand. He was analyzing her. Memorizing her. She stitched. Her internal monologue was a high-pitched scream of, "Oh God, oh God, oh God!" But her hands, bless her scientist's hands, were surprisingly steady. She was meticulous. She closed the exit wound first, her movements precise, if not fast. Then the entrance. She was leaning in, her face inches from his bare chest. She could count the dark eyelashes resting on his high cheekbone. She could feel his breath on her forehead. The penthouse was silent, save for the snip of the thread and her own ragged breathing. The sexual tension in the room was a tangible, violent thing. It was a suffocating, terrifying, and utterly thrilling mix of raw fear and a dark, illicit pull she had no name for. Finally, she tied the last knot. It wasn't pretty. It was functional, angry, and tight. "It'll hold," she panted, pulling back, her adrenaline crashing. "Probably. You'll need antibiotics. And you can't, do whatever it is you do. For a while." She felt high, drunk on terror and proximity. She started, somewhat manically, to clean up her bloody towels, her hands shaking so hard she could barely grip the bottle. He stood up. He moved with a wince, but he was on his feet, rolling his newly stitched shoulder. He was a terrifying, beautiful, half-naked spectacle of violence and control. He walked to her. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of her, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He penned her in against the bar cart. "You did well, Dottoressa," he murmured, his voice soft and deadly. I know first aid," she stammered, her bluff crumbling. "Yes, you do." He was too close. She could feel the heat from his body. And this time, it had nothing to do with the wound. His gray eyes scanned her face, feature by feature, as if he was committing her to memory before he erased her. He lifted his good hand, and she flinched. But he didn't hurt her. He gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were calloused, and they grazed the shell of her ear, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity straight down her spine. "You have the hands of a researcher?" he whispered, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "Delicate, precise. But they've never held a scalpel like that before. They've never stitched a man's skin together." Elara's blood ran cold. The bluff was over. "You never corrected me at the gala, Elara." He said her name, her first name, and in that one word she knew. He had known all along. "So tell me," he murmured, leaning in, his lips hovering an inch from hers. "What exactly are you a doctor of?" Chapter 3. The Confession and the Contract. The air in the penthouse, already thin at this altitude, seemed to vacuum seal itself around them. He was too close. The heat from his uninjured side, the metallic tang of his blood, the eye-wateringly expensive scent of his soap. It all combined into a suffocating, intoxicating cloud. Elara's entire nervous system was a lit fuse. "What?" he repeated, his voice a low, velvet purr that was more terrifying than a shout. "Exactly. Are you a doctor of?" Her bluff, which she had ridden like a stolen horse, had just collapsed, throwing her head first into the dirt. The jig was up. He knew. "Biochemistry," she blurted out. The word sounded small and stupid in the vast, silent room. Dante's expression didn't change. He just watched her, his gray eyes unblinking. "I have a Ph.D. in biochemistry," she continued, her voice gaining a frantic, hysterical edge. The adrenaline was still pumping. And now, with nowhere else to go, it turned into a torrent of words. "Not an MD, not a surgeon, not a healthcare provider. I study protein folding, protein aggregation. The closest I come to a patient is a petri dish. I am in no uncertain terms the worst possible person you could have chosen for this." She was ranting now, poking a finger into his uninjured, rock-solid pectoral muscle for emphasis. "I had to guess where your brachial artery wasn't. I was one slip away from you bleeding out on your minimalist, probably custom-tailored Italian, marble floor. Do you have any idea the malpractice insurance premiums a real surgeon pays for this? I'm not even insured for this. My liability is limited to spilling a yeast culture." She was breathing hard, her eyes wide with a combination of terror and righteous indignation. "You're lucky I'm meticulous. You're lucky I have steady hands from managing data models on a microscopic level. You should be in a hospital, not having a yeast scientist play operation on you in your luxury real estate sky palace," she finished, breathless, her chest heaving. Dante Volkov was silent for a full, agonizing 10 seconds. His eyes scanned her face, as if cross-referencing her features with a file he had memorized. And then, the most terrifying thing of all happened. He smiled. It wasn't the polite, predatory curve he'd given her at the gala. This was a genuine, sharp, devastatingly amused smile. It lit his eyes and transformed his face from a cold mask into something lethally, breathtakingly alive. "Biochemistry," he said, tasting the word. You study yeast. Among other things, she snapped, her fear momentarily eclipsed by her academic pride. My research has potential applications in pharmaceutical development for neurodegenerative diseases. It's complex, it's important, and it has nothing to do with holes in people. No, he agreed, the smile fading into something more calculating. He finally took a step back, breaking the suffocating proximity. The loss of his body heat was immediate, leaving her skin cold. He walked, wincing only slightly, to the wall of windows, his back to her. My world is built on data, he said, his voice quiet. Information. Knowing who to trust is the most critical risk assessment I make. Every day. He turned back to face her, his newly stitched shoulder a stark, brutal mark against his skin. The bullet that went through me was unexpected. It came from a rival who, until last night, I considered a partner. It means I have a leak, a data breach in my organization. The doctor on my payroll, the one who should be here, I can no longer trust his diagnostics, or his discretion. A trip to the hospital. That's a paper trail. It's a vulnerability. It's admitting weakness to the other sharks in the private equity tank. He stalked back toward her, his grace returning with every step, the pain a distant, managed thing. And then you appeared at that gala. Dr. Hayes. Brilliant, nervous, and utterly out of place, a complete unknown. So you... What? You just decided to have me kidnapped? I decided to run a check, he corrected smoothly. My asset protection team is very thorough. Elara's blood didn't just run cold, it evaporated. A check? Elara Hayes, Ph.D. He was in front of her again, but this time he wasn't crowding her. He was observing her, like a new, fascinating specimen. You graduated magna cum laude from Johns Hopkins, your thesis. Misfolded protein aggregation and its effect on prion-like domains in cellular biology. It was ambitious. He had read her thesis. The world tilted. That was more intimate, more violating than his hand on her ear. That thesis was her soul. You're stalled, he continued, his voice a soft, sympathetic knife twist. Your boss, Dr. Peterson, keeps reallocating your grant proposal funds to his own pet projects. You're trying to secure a business loan for a new Zeta potential analyzer, but the hospital board won't approve the capital expenditure. Your student loans are, to use a technical term, astronomical. You are, Dr. Hayes, a genius in a cage. She was speechless. This man hadn't just seen her. He'd dissected her. He'd done a full forensic analysis on her entire life. You lied to me, he murmured, and when I called your bluff, you stitched me up like a seasoned pro, all while threatening to sue me for malpractice. You have more nerve, Dottoressa, than half the men on my payroll. What? What do you want? She whispered, her throat dry. He smiled. And this was the smile of a man closing a hostile takeover. I want to make an investment. He gestured to the sofa. Sit. It was a command. She sat, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. I am offering you a private contract, he said, prowling in front of her. I will fund your research, completely. No more begging for grants. No more beige cardigan bosses. I will build you your own lab. The best biotech equipment money can buy. The analyzer you want? You'll have 3. You will have your own team. You will have an unlimited budget. You will have everything you need to, as you said, change the world. Elara's heart stopped. It was her dream. It was the impossible, unreachable, shining fantasy she whispered to herself in the dark. It was everything. In exchange, she managed to say. In exchange, he said, stopping directly in front of her. You work for me. He leaned down, placing his hands on the sofa on either side of her, caging her in. His face was inches from hers. The scent of blood and whiskey was gone, replaced by that clean steel and soap smell that was just him. You will be my private consultant. When I have problems, you will analyze them. That rival who tried to kill me? I have a feeling he's not done. Maybe next time it's not a bullet. Maybe it's a poison. A biochemical agent. Something your unique mind would find. You will be my forensic expert. His eyes dropped to her lips. And you will be my personal physician. For when disputes arise, you will not discuss me, my business, or this penthouse with anyone. You will sign an NDA so binding that the attorneys who wrote it are probably monsters in a cave. Your discretion will be absolute. Your loyalty will be to me, not the hospital, not your ethics board, me. It wasn't an offer. It was a declaration of ownership. He was offering her a gilded cage, and the key was her own ambition. I can't, she whispered, even as her heart hammered with a terrible, dark want. This is insane. It's criminal. I'm a scientist, not a mafia scientist. A mafia scientist, he mused, a spark of humor in his eyes. I like that. We'll put it on your business cards. This isn't funny. No, he agreed, his expression hardening. It's not. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. You are already a liability, Elara. You are in my home. You saw my face, you touched my wound. You are an accomplice after the fact. Right now you are a loose end, and I hate loose ends. The threat was there, cold and sharp. Her choices were not A, accept the dream job, or B, go back to the lab. Her choices were A, accept the dream job, or B, disappear. This wasn't a contract negotiation. It was a severance package from her old life. He saw the understanding dawn on her face. He saw the terror, the calculation, and finally, the resignation. You're a brilliant woman, Elara, he said, his voice softening, becoming persuasive, intimate. Don't you want to see what that brilliant mind can really do? Unfettered? Unchained from budgets and bureaucracy? I'm not offering you a cage. I'm offering you the world. She looked at his gray eyes, a stormy, unreadable ocean of power. She looked at the fresh stitches on his shoulder. Her stitches. She thought of her cramped lab, of Peterson stealing her data, of the endless, soul-crushing, no, no, no. And here was this man, this beautiful, terrifying devil, offering her the one, all-encompassing yes she had craved her entire life. She wet her dry lips. And my health insurance? Does Mafia scientist at least get dental? Dante's smile was slow, victorious, and utterly devastating. You get me, Dottoressa. I am your wealth management, your asset protection, and your life insurance all rolled into one. You will be the most well-protected yeast scientist on the planet. He stood up, holding out his good hand to her. A gesture of partnership? Or of a king to a new favored subject? She stared at his hand, calloused, strong, and stained with his own drying blood. Taking it wasn't just a choice. It was a diagnosis. Her old life was dead. Elara Hayes, Ph.D., reached out and put her trembling hand in his. His grip was instant, warm, and possessive, sealing the contract more effectively than any ink. Good, he murmured, pulling her to her feet. Your new lab is already being acquired. We start tomorrow. Chapter 4. The First House Call. The first thing that hit Elara was the smoke. It wasn't the sterile, vaporized mist of an e-cigarette. It was the real thing. Thick, expensive, and acrid, it hung in the air of the private club like a physical entity, clinging to the flocked wallpaper and the heavy velvet curtains. The second thing she noticed was the sound. Silence. Not the quiet of her lab, but a heavy, pressurized silence, broken only by the soft shuff, shuff, shuff of cards and the liquid clink of heavy crystal on glass. This was her new lab. "Stay close," Dante murmured. His voice was a low vibration against her ear, his good hand resting with proprietary weight on the bare skin of her lower back. The hand and the dress were the sources of her current existential crisis. 2 days after the contract had been sealed, Scar had appeared at her apartment with a single, long, black garment bag. There were no instructions, just a time for pickup. The dress inside was an investment. A slinky, floor-length column of emerald green silk that felt like liquid sin against her skin. It had a slit up one side that defied both gravity and her personal sense of risk management. It was, without question, the most expensive, impractical, and terrifying piece of clothing she had ever worn. She felt less like a scientist and more like a sacrifice. "I feel ridiculous," she whispered, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of the tiny matching clutch he'd also provided. "I'm a walking fire hazard. This silk probably has a flashpoint of—" "You look." Dante paused, his gray eyes sweeping over her as they moved through the room. Adequate." From any other man, it would have been an insult. From Dante, whose gaze was currently cataloging the room's exits and asset protection. 3 massive guards by the door, 2 more by the bar. Adequate felt like a scorching private compliment. His hand flexed on her back, his thumb drawing a small hot circle. Mine. They were in the back room of a high-end, unmarked steakhouse. A place that probably didn't have a menu, just a series of zeros on a balance sheet. A single, large, green-felted table dominated the center. 5 men, all in custom-tailored suits that screamed old money or new very dangerous money, sat around it. A cloud of cigar smoke obscured their faces, creating a tableau of shadowy, powerful figures. This wasn't a game. It was a boardroom meeting where the portfolio was measured in chips. "Dante, you came." A man at the head of the table spoke. His voice was smooth with a faint Eastern European accent. He rose, spreading his hands in welcome. "And you brought a new accretion." Elara bristled. Dante's hand tightened on her back. A silent stay put. "Anton," Dante said, his voice flat. He guided Elara to the chair beside his, seating her before taking his own. "This is Dr. Hayes. She's consulting for me on a new biotech venture." Anton Mikhailov smiled. He was handsome in a slick, reptilian way, with pale eyes and hair so blonde it was almost white. He ran, as Dante had briefed her, a massive pharmaceutical development company that was widely understood to be a front for one of the largest chemical trafficking rings in Europe. "A doctor," Anton mused, his eyes sliding over Elara with a collector's appreciation. "How specific. I trust your shoulder is healing, my friend? A most unfortunate liability." "It's managing," Dante said, his voice lethally smooth. He was already accepting his buy-in, a large stack of heavy crimson-colored chips. This was the mission. Dante's briefing in the car had been sparse and terrifying. "I've played with Anton twice since the incident. Both times I've left with a splitting headache and nausea that lasted for 2 days. It's affecting my judgment. My data analysis of the game is off. He's not just a cheat, he's a chemist. You are not my date, Elara. You are my forensic analyst. You will watch. You will not eat. You will not drink anything you don't watch the bartender pour yourself. And you will find out what he's doing. Or you will be a very pretty, very useless investment." The stakes were clear. Elara's scientific brain, which had been short-circuited by the silk dress and the cigar smoke, clicked back online. This wasn't a social event. This was field work. She accepted a seltzer with lime from a passing waitress, her eyes tracking the glass from the bar to her hand. She took a small sip. It tasted like seltzer. Good. Variable 1, neutralized. She began her analysis. Hypothesis: Anton is introducing a biochemical agent to the game. Objective: identify the agent and the delivery vector. Variables: ingestion, the food, untouched by Dante or Anton, the drinks, communal whiskey, but Dante was sticking to his own water. Inhalation, the cigar smoke. It was thick, but ubiquitous. Hard to target one person. Transdermal. Contact. The cards? The chips? She watched. For an hour, she sat in perfect, quiet stillness, a beautiful, glittering statue next to the cold fire intensity of Dante. He played poker the way he did everything, with a terrifying, absolute control. He was a master of risk assessment, folding more than he played, watching, calculating, letting the other men bleed their investment portfolios dry. And she watched Anton. He was a preener. He gestured, he talked, he smiled, and he had a tic. A large, ornate, cabochon-cut ruby ring on his right pinky. He would tap it, rub it, twist it. Then she saw it. The dealer, a house employee, slid a fresh deck of cards onto the table. Anton, as host, broke the seal. He handled the cards, his thumb rubbing that ruby ring before he passed the deck to be shuffled. No, too broad. It would affect everyone. She watched him play. He'd get his chips. He'd stack them. He'd rub them. His thumb would go from his ring to the stack of high-value crimson chips, the same ones Dante now had. Vector identified, she thought, her heart hammering. The chips, the high-value ones, he's coded them. A contact poison, something transdermal. She catalogued Dante's symptoms: headache, nausea, slowed judgment. Classic signs of an organophosphate, a nerve agent, or a derivative. Something designed for cognitive disruption. It was brilliant. It was subtle. It wouldn't kill him, just make him lose, make him look weak, a slow-acting hostile takeover of his faculties. Dante was touching those chips. He just ran a hand through his stack, his fingertips sliding over the smooth, infected clay. He subsequently rubbed his temple. He was already being dosed. Elara's blood ran cold. She had to act. She couldn't speak. Not here. She slid her hand into the tiny, useless clutch and pulled out the slim, encrypted phone Dante had given her. Under the table, out of sight, she typed a single, frantic message. It's the chips. The red ones. He's coded them. Contact toxin. Transdermal. Stop touching them. You need to wash your hands. She hit send. Across the table, Anton raised the bet. 100,000 Dante. To you. Are you feeling lucky? Elara watched, holding her breath. Dante's phone in his pocket would have given a single, silent vibration. He didn't check it. His eyes were locked on Anton. He was calculating. He rubbed his temple again. Dante, she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the pressurized room, it sounded like a scream. All eyes snapped to her. Anton's smile tightened. Dante turned his head, his gray eyes unreadable. I think I left my other clutch in the car, she stammered, feeling like the world's worst spy. The one with my data drive. My lipstick. It was a terrible, flimsy, stupid excuse. Dante's face remained a mask, but she saw a flicker deep in his eyes. He'd read the text. He understood her ridiculous coded panic. He was being poisoned now. He stared at the pile of chips in the center of the table. He stared at his own stack. He looked at Anton's smiling, reptilian face. Then, with a sigh of profound boredom, Dante folded. He tossed his cards onto the table. The lady is bored, he announced, standing up and pushing his chair back. The legs screeched on the hardwood floor. And my shoulder is stiff. I'm cashing out. The table was stunned. Anton's smile vanished. Dante, the game is young. A bad beat? My investment has soured, Dante said, his voice like chipped ice. He was looking right at Anton. He hadn't touched his chips to cash them out. He just gestured to Scar, who appeared from the shadows to handle the transaction. I know when to cut my losses. The message was clear. I know. Dante's hand was on her back again, not gentle this time, but a hard, urgent grip. Let's go. He propelled her from the room. The silence followed them, a heavy, suffocating wave of unspoken violence. They didn't speak in the elevator. They didn't speak in the sedan. The partition was up, separating them from Scar. The second the car began to move, Elara's adrenaline-fueled calm shattered. Give me your hands, she commanded, her voice shaking. Dante looked at her, his face pale and grim in the passing streetlights. He held out his hands. I don't have a decontamination kit, she rambled, her scientist brain screaming at her lack of equipment. She fumbled in her clutch. I have hand sanitizer. It's 70% ethanol. It's a solvent. It'll have to do. She flipped the cap on the tiny bottle and squeezed a huge, goopy mess into his large, calloused palms. Rub, she ordered. In the back of the speeding, silent luxury vehicle, Elara Hayes, Ph.D., proceeded to wash Dante Volkov's hands. She didn't just let him do it. She did it. She grabbed his hands, her small, trembling fingers lacing with his. She scrubbed his palms, his knuckles, the skin between his fingers, with a frantic, clinical, and shockingly intimate intensity. You have to get it all, she whispered, her head bowed to the task. It's probably a biochemical agent designed to absorb quickly. We need to... Elara. His voice was a low growl. She stopped, but her hands were still gripping his, covered in the sticky, alcohol-scented gel. She looked up. His face was inches from hers. The air in the car was thick with her perfume, the smell of the sanitizer, and the raw, undiluted power of the man in front of her. He wasn't looking at his hands. He was looking at her. And the expression in his eyes was something she had never seen before. Not anger, not amusement. It was a dark, possessive hunger. You were right, he murmured, a toxicology expert, a mafia scientist. It was a hypothesis, she stammered, her heart doing a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. It was a fact, he corrected, his voice dropping. His good hand, the one not being gripped by hers, came up. He didn't touch her face. He didn't touch her hair. He laid his hand flat on her chest, right over her heart, his palm a heavy, warm brand against her skin, right above the silk. Do you feel that? He whispered. She could only nod, her breath trapped in her lungs. It's beating, he said, because your brain saved my life. His eyes dropped to her mouth. You're not a liability, Dottoressa. You're a very dangerous asset. He leaned in. The world shrank to the space between their lips. The car was silent, the tension a tangible, screaming thing. This was it. He stopped, a millimeter from her mouth. When we get to the penthouse, he breathed, you're going to scrub every inch of my hands again, with soap and vodka, thoroughly. He leaned back, breaking the spell. The promise, however, hung in the air, more potent than any poison. Chapter 5. The Price of Research. The following 48 hours were a cognitive split. By day, Elara was Dr. Hayes, scientist. She ran her assays, updated her data models, and tried to ignore the fact that her boss, Dr. Peterson, was actively avoiding her. By night, she was Dante's. She fell into exhausted, dreamless sleep, her body still humming with the phantom vibration of the sedan, her hands still tingling with the memory of scrubbing Dante's skin with vodka in his sterile, moonlit kitchen. That decontamination had been a masterclass in tension. It was silent, clinical, and excruciating. He'd stood there, stripped to the waist again, his stitched shoulder a dark counterpoint to his pale skin. He'd watched her with that burning, analytic gaze as she'd meticulously, thoroughly, worked over every inch of his hands and forearms. It was not sexual. It was possessive, a ritual of cleansing and claiming. She hadn't left until 4 a.m. Now she was back in her lab on Thursday morning, staring at a screen of corrupted data, her third espresso doing nothing to cut the fog. Her life was officially a dumpster fire, a very expensive, well-tailored dumpster fire. The lab door hissed open. "Hayes?" Elara winced. Dr. Peterson. He walked in, his beige cardigan the color of, well, beige. He held a stack of papers. "Hayes, about your grant proposal for the new SaaS modeling platform. The board and I have discussed your budget allocation for the next quarter, and frankly, your ROI projections are optimistic. But my projections are based on the fact that our current software is a decade old, and my optimism is that we might cure a neurodegenerative disease, Peterson." Elara snapped, her patience worn thin. "But go on. Tell me how my capital expenditure request for the Zeta Analyzer is less important than your new ergonomic office chair." Peterson's face pinched. He hated when she showed her teeth. "Your attitude is precisely the problem. This isn't some private equity slush fund. This is a hospital. We have protocols your request for... Let's see." He licked his thumb and flipped a page. "A D9000 spectrometer is denied. Again." Elara felt the familiar hot rush of tears, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated rage. She was about to tell him exactly what he could do with his budget allocation when an email alert pinged on her monitor. It wasn't from the hospital. It was from a sender she didn't recognize. A CTSERV at Volkov_asset_management.com. Subject: confirmation of wire transfer. Her mouse hovered, then clicked. It was a simple, text-only email. A bank confirmation. To Dr. Elara Hayes. From Volkov Asset Management, Private Accounts Division.
Initial capital infusion for Project Dottoressa.
We are pleased to confirm your new biotech research fund has been activated. A wire transfer in the amount of $25 million has been successfully deposited into the holding account for your new laboratory, Hayes Clinical Solutions, LLC. An asset management team will be in contact shortly to facilitate equipment acquisition and staffing. Welcome to the portfolio. Elara stared. $25 million. A laugh erupted from her. It was a wild, unhinged, slightly terrifying sound. Peterson, who had been droning on about fiscal responsibility, stopped mid-sentence. "What is so funny, Hayes?" Elara spun her chair around, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. She felt dizzy, drunk on power. "Peterson," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. How much is this whole lab? Your salary? Marge's salary? The entire research division's operating budget for the next 5 years? I don't see how that's relevant," he stammered, clearly unnerved by her sudden shift. "I'm just curious," she said, leaning back in her chair, feeling for the first time like she wasn't trapped in it. "Because I think I just bought it." She turned her monitor for him to see. Peterson leaned in. His eyes scanned the text. He reread the number. Once. Twice. His face, normally a pasty beige, went a stark, alarming white. He looked like he'd just seen the forensic analysis of his own murder. Hayes Clinical Solutions? He squeaked. 25 million? That's just the initial infusion, Dr. Peterson, Elara said, standing up. She relished the way he flinched back, as if she were radioactive. For my new lab, the one as my investor, put it, I'll be moving into once the acquisition is final. But Volkov Asset Management? Hayes, that's Dante Volkov. That's practically organized crime. That's private equity, Peterson, Elara corrected, her voice silk and steel. And they're my new angel investors. They seem to have a much more aggressive and, shall we say, appreciative view of my ROI projections. She picked up her worn leather satchel. So you can take your denied grant proposal, and you can file it. Permanently. I'll be in my new lab on Monday. I'll send you a link to my Hayes Clinical Solutions website. Maybe you can apply for a job. As, I don't know, a lab tech. We'll see. I'll have my new wealth management team review your resume. She brushed past him, her shoulders back, her head held high. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the supplicant. She was the power. She didn't look back at the sound of Dr. Peterson making a small, choking noise. That night, she was the only one left. The lab was dark, save for the blue-white glow of her computer screen and the steady, rhythmic hum of the industrial freezers. She wasn't working. She was shopping. She was on the website for the D9000 spectrometer, the one Peterson had denied. She clicked Add to Cart. Then she added the Zeta Potential Analyzer, and a new confocal microscope, and a cloud-based server bank for her data analytics. The total was staggering. It was more than the hospital's entire quarterly budget. She clicked Checkout, entered the new corporate account number, and hit Confirm. A small "Thank you for your purchase" screen popped up. It was the single greatest aphrodisiac she had ever known. I see my investment is already being put to good use. The voice came from the shadows by the door. Elara screamed, spinning her chair around so fast she nearly toppled it. Dante Volkov was leaning against the doorframe, as if he'd been there for an hour. He wasn't in a suit. He was in dark trousers and a soft black cashmere sweater that made him look less like a CEO and more like a panther. He was all quiet, contained power, and lethal grace. "You can't do that," she panted, her hand pressed to her chest, where her heart was trying to escape. This is a sterile environment. You need a key card, a badge, a warning bell. My team is persuasive. He pushed off the doorframe and walked into her lab. His presence seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The sterile, familiar space suddenly felt small, charged, and incredibly dangerous. He looked around, his eyes cataloging everything. "This is where you hide." "I don't hide," she snapped, defensive. "I work, or I did, until my life was turned into a biotech-themed mafia movie." "You're welcome." He glided past her, not stopping. He was heading for the holiest of holies, her whiteboard. It was covered in her work. Equations, biochemical pathway diagrams, notes, and frantic arrows. It was her brain, mapped out in erasable marker. It was her intellectual property, her soul. She felt suddenly, terrifyingly naked. "Don't," she said, her voice small. That's proprietary." He ignored her. He stood in front of it, his hands clasped behind his back. The blue light from her sequencer cast shadows across his carved features. He was silent for a full minute, just reading. Elara held her breath. He wouldn't get it. It was years of specialized, high-level research. It was... "You're looking in the wrong place," he said, his voice quiet. Elara blinked. "What?" "Here." He stepped forward and, to her absolute horror, picked up a red marker. "Your data model is flawed. You're assuming the misfolded protein is the cause of the cellular decay, but your own data. He tapped a graph in the corner. Your own data shows the decay beginning 2 picoseconds before the aggregation. It's not the cause, it's a symptom. Elara's brain stalled. She stared at the graph, at his hand, at the equation he was now correcting. That's not. How do you know that? He turned to look at her. The amusement was back, but it was sharper, laced with a genuine, unnerving intelligence. I didn't build an empire by being stupid, Dottoressa. I build it by seeing patterns. Your risk assessment is focused on the wrong variable. She walked toward him, drawn by an invisible string. She stared at the board, at his correction. He wasn't a biochemist. He wasn't a scientist. But he was. He's right, she whispered, her own mind catching up, the tumblers clicking into place. If it's a symptom, if it's the result of the decay, not the cause, then the real agent is, my God, it's something else, something I've been missing. Her head snapped up to look at him. He was standing right in front of her. She hadn't realized how close she'd gotten. This was it. This was the intimacy. It wasn't the whiskey-soaked examination. It wasn't the frantic decontamination. It was this. Him, in her lab, in front of her whiteboard, seeing her, not her body, not the dress, her mind. And it was, as the outline had predicted, the most powerful aphrodisiac on the planet. You, she breathed, her voice shaky. You understand. I understand assets, he murmured, his gaze dropping from the whiteboard to her face. And I understand power. And you have been powerless for too long. The sterile chemical smell of the lab was gone, replaced by the warm, clean, masculine scent of cashmere and him. The hum of the freezer was a low, electric thrum that vibrated through the soles of her feet. He didn't move. He just watched her as her realization, about her work, about him, played across her face. You're not just a scientist, Elara, he whispered. You're a weapon, and you've been sitting in a box gathering dust. He took a step. She instinctively took one back, her spine hitting the -80-degree freezer with a cold, hard thud. The shock of the cold through her thin shirt made her gasp. He was on her, instantly, not touching her, but caging her. He placed one hand on the freezer by her head, the other on the workbench beside her. His body, a furnace of heat, was inches from hers, trapping her between fire and ice. Your old life? He murmured. Your little grant proposals? Your beige boss? That's all gone? You're mine now. Your work is mine. Your discoveries are mine. He leaned in, his face so close his lips brushed her ear. She was trembling, a violent vibration that was part cold, part terror, and part a devastating, undeniable arousal. Your mind, he breathed, is the most dangerous asset in my entire portfolio. She turned her head, her lips parting to say what? To protest? To agree? Her mouth was inches from his. She could see the dark gray of his eyes, the tiny lines at the corners. The tension was a physical thing, a high-voltage wire screaming between them. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted it with a desperate, chemical certainty that eclipsed all her fear, all her logic. He saw it. He saw the surrender in her eyes. A slow, possessive smile touched his lips. And he pulled back. Just an inch. Just enough to break the spell, but not the cage. He left her vibrating, aching, trapped between the ice and his heat. Get your new proprietary data in order, Dottoressa, he whispered, his voice a gravelly command. You have a new lab to christen, and I have a new rival to dissect. He paused, his eyes holding hers. Your mind is dangerous. I'm so very glad it's mine. He stepped away, and the world rushed back in, the hum of the freezer, the chemical smell. He was just gone. The lab door whooshed shut, leaving Elara alone, her back pressed against the frozen metal, her entire body shaking, and her mind on fire. Chapter 6. The rival's interest. The power was intoxicating. Elara Hayes, Ph.D, and now CEO of Hayes Clinical Solutions LLC, was someone she barely recognized. The last 3 weeks had been a blur of logistics, acquisitions, and wielding a black Amex card with a limit that was, apparently, purely theoretical. Her new lab, occupying the entire top floor of a private biotech high-rise in the financial district, was a gleaming temple of glass and steel. It was, she admitted, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She was currently in the ground floor cafe of that building, a sleek place smelling of dark roast and investment banking. She was waiting for a very expensive supply chain manager to arrive to discuss the expedited shipping of a specialized cell incubator from Germany. She sipped her latte, reviewing the logistics on her new tablet, and felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated competence. She was doing it. She was a boss. The chair opposite her slid back. Dr. Hayes, what a delightful coincidence. Elara's blood didn't just run cold, it hit absolute zero. The voice was smooth, cultured, and laced with the faint, reptilian sibilance she remembered from the poker game. She looked up slowly. Anton Mikhailov smiled, sliding into the seat. He was immaculate in a light gray suit that probably cost more than her old car, his blonde hair swept back. He looked less like a criminal and more like a venture capital predator. Mr. Mikhailov, she said, her voice admirably steady. Her heart, however, was attempting to breach contract with her ribcage. I'm afraid I'm waiting for someone. The supply chain consultant from BioLine? He asked, waving to the waitress for an espresso. He'll be 15 minutes late. A small customs issue with his flight easily arranged. He had delayed her meeting, just to talk to her. The casual, terrifying display of power was not lost on her. What do you want? Elara asked, snapping her tablet shut. To apologize, of course, he said, all polished charm. Our last meeting was tense. Dante was not himself. He's been under a great deal of stress. Bad investments, hostile markets. He leaned in, his pale eyes alight with a performer's sincerity. And I wanted to meet the mind he's hiding. He's not hiding me. I'm a consultant. Of course you are. Anton's smile was dismissive. A consultant he dresses in silk and uses as a... What was it? A forensic analyst. Tell me, doctor, how are the intellectual property rights on that arrangement? Does he let you publish? Or is all your brilliant data disappearing into his private portfolio? Elara said nothing. He was, of course, exactly right. Her contract had been less a negotiation and more a declaration of ownership. I know who you are, Elara, he continued, his voice dropping. I ran your Hayes Clinical Solutions LLC registration. I read your thesis. It's brilliant. It's also, if I may be blunt, wasted. My research is fully funded, she said, her spine stiffening. Funded by what? Blood money. To what end? To help him win a poker game? To patch up his thugs? That's not science, that's asset management, of the wet work variety. He leaned in, his charm replaced by the keen, focused look of a recruiter about to close a deal. I run one of the largest pharmaceutical development firms in Europe, legitimate, publicly traded. We have clinical trials in Phase 3. We have FDA approval on 2 continents. We are actually trying to cure the diseases you're doodling about. He was good. He was hitting every single one of her insecurities. What I'm offering, he said, is a real job, not a gilded cage, I'm offering you the position of Chief Research Officer at Mikhailov Biologics, your own division, your own team, a compensation package that will make what Dante is paying you look like an allowance. And Elara..." He reached across the table, as if to take her hand. "A legitimate legacy. No more hiding. No more looking over your shoulder. Just real, world-changing science. And of course, proper legal liability coverage, which I doubt he's provided." She stared at his hand. The hand with the poisoned ruby ring. It was the dream. It was the clean dream. The one she'd had before a man made of steel and shadows had shown her a shortcut. I can't," she whispered. "Think about it," Anton said, not unkindly. He placed a slim platinum business card on the table. "That's my private line. I'll have my attorneys draft a preliminary offer. Just do your due diligence, doctor. Ask yourself what happens when your investor decides his new asset is underperforming." He stood, dropped a 50 on the table for his untouched espresso, and smoothed his suit. "A pleasure, doctor. I do hope we'll be collaborating soon." He walked out, leaving Elara in a state of psychic shock. Her mind was racing. A real job, FDA approval, a legacy. He was offering her a way out. He was offering her life back, only better. She stared at the card. Without thinking, she picked it up. A black, glossy sedan screeched to a halt at the curb in front of the cafe, the tires protesting. The back door flew open. "Get in the car!" The voice wasn't a request. It was a metal-on-metal command. Dante. He was sitting in the shadows of the back seat, his face a mask of cold, terrifying fury. Elara's blood turned to ice. She jammed the business card into her pocket, grabbed her tablet, and bolted from the cafe, her heart hammering. She didn't look back at the confused supply chain manager who was just walking in. She scrambled into the car. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with the finality of a prison gate. The car, one of Dante's luxury vehicles but not the one she was used to, peeled out into traffic, throwing her hard against the leather seat. The partition was up. It was just them. He didn't speak for 3 blocks. He just looked at her. His rage was a physical thing, a crushing pressure in the small space. He wasn't the amused, intelligent, almost tender man from her lab. This was the Mafia Boss. This was the man who had put a rival's business dispute in the ground. "Enjoying your networking lunch?" he finally asked, his voice lethally quiet. "Dante, it wasn't..." He just sat down. "I didn't know he'd be there." "You were smiling," he hissed. "You were listening to him. What exactly did he have to say that was so engaging?" "He offered me a job." The words tumbled out, defensive and stupid. "A real one, at his pharmaceutical company, with clinical trials and a 401k. It was, she realized, a millisecond too late, the worst possible thing she could have said. The car's atmosphere flash froze. His fury, which had been hot, turned into something glacial and far more terrifying. "A job," he repeated. His voice was dead. "You were negotiating with him." "No, I wasn't. I don't know. He was just talking. What am I supposed to do, Dante? You can't just keep me locked up. I'm not a prisoner." "You are," he roared, the sudden explosion of sound making her jump. "You are not an employee, Elara. You are a secured asset, my most valuable one, and you just sat there in public and let my single greatest rival perform due diligence on you. I am not an asset. I'm a person." "You are mine," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You don't talk to him. You don't look at him. You don't breathe his air. Your meeting with him wasn't a job offer. It was a breach of contract. It was a hostile action." "You can't control who I talk to," she shouted back, fueled by terror and a righteous, desperate indignation. "You don't own me." The car jerked to a stop. They were in the private garage. Before she could react, he was out, yanking her door open and hauling her from the seat. His grip on her arm was a band of steel. "Dante, you're hurting me!" He didn't respond. He dragged her, half running, half stumbling, into the private elevator. The doors slid shut, encasing them in the small, silent, mirrored box. He slammed his hand on the penthouse button, and then he slammed his other hand on the red stop button. The elevator car lurched to a halt between floors, the emergency light casting a sickly red glow over his face. He was breathing hard. He advanced on her, backing her into the corner of the mirrored wall. "Was his offer better?" he demanded, his voice a low, raw rasp. "Did his portfolio impress you, Dottoressa? Did you like his compensation package?" "Stop it!" "Did you like the way he looked at you?" he snarled, pinning her, caging her in with his body. "He looked at me like a scientist," she lied, pushing against his chest. It was like pushing against a marble wall. You look at me like what?" he whispered, his eyes dark as a storm-tossed sea, dropping to her mouth. "Say it." "Like a possession," she choked out. "You are." The word was a growl, a promise, a sentence, and then his mouth was on hers. It was not a kiss. It was a hostile takeover. It was a furious, claiming, devastating assault. It was the culmination of every second of tension since the gala. The stitches, the vodka, the whiteboard, the car. It was all his rage, his jealousy, and his terrifying possessiveness channeled into a single, brutal act. His lips were hard, bruising, demanding. He didn't ask. He took. He grabbed her face, his fingers tangling in her hair, tilting her head to the angle he wanted. His other arm wrapped around her waist, crushing her against him. She felt the hard lines of his body, the frantic beat of his heart. Or maybe it was hers. She tasted coffee, rage, and pure, undiluted Dante. Her mind went white. Her data models, her biochemistry, her fear, it all dissolved. There was no lab, no rival, no Anton. There was only this fire, this all-consuming, terrifying claiming. She whimpered, a small, involuntary sound of surrender. The sound broke him. The kiss changed. The fury didn't ebb, but it was channeled. The bruising pressure became a deep, hungry, possessive exploration. His tongue swept her mouth, staking a claim, branding her as his. It was no longer a punishment. It was a declaration. Mine. She was shaking, her knees weak, her hands fisted in his sweater. She was kissing him back. She was meeting his fury with her own desperate, terrified, and undeniable hunger. He finally tore his mouth from hers, both of them panting, chests heaving in the small, red-lit space. He didn't let her go. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged. Her mouth was stinging, her lips swollen, her entire body thrumming with an adrenaline she'd never known. "Let me be very clear," he breathed, his voice raw, his eyes opening to pin her with a gaze that burned. "You are mine. There is no negotiation. There are no other offers." He watched her, waiting. Understood? Her no was a small, traitorous puff of air. I. He silenced her with another kiss, shorter this time, but just as deep. A full stop. A period at the end of his statement. He finally lifted his head. Understood? He repeated. She could only nod, her mind wiped clean, her body completely, terrifyingly and irrevocably. His. Chapter 7, Clinical Devotion, The Gilded Cage was beautiful. After the elevator, after the raw, possessive, soul-stealing kiss that had felt less like a romance and more like a hostile acquisition of her very being, he hadn't taken her home. He had taken her to his home, the penthouse. Her apartment, she learned via a text from Scar, was being liquidated. Her essential assets, as he'd termed them, had been moved. She was now a permanent resident, a prisoner. For 2 days, Elara had existed in a state of suspended shock. The fury from the elevator had cooled into a thick, possessive, and surprisingly gentle domesticity on his part. He'd had a state-of-the-art biotech workstation, complete with a secure server link to her new lab, installed in a glass-walled office overlooking the city. He brought her coffee. He watched her work. And he had a guard, the scarred man, Scar, whose name she'd learned was Leo, stationed permanently by the private elevator. She was his. The fact was as immutable as a law of physics. The terrifying part? A small, traitorous piece of her, the part that had been fighting for scraps her entire life, felt safe. She was running data models for her real project, the one that had been her thesis when the elevator doors crashed open. It wasn't the polite hiss of Leo's arrival. It was a violent, metallic shriek. Dante was there. He wasn't in a suit. He was in the black sweater and trousers from her lab, his face a mask of pale, cold fury. He was flanked by 2 of his men, and they were carrying someone. They were carrying Misha, the man she'd called Suit. And he was a ruin. He was soaked in blood from the chest down, his massive body limp, a gurgling, wet sound escaping his lips with every shallow breath. "On the sofa! Now!" Dante roared. They dumped him on the white, billion-dollar sofa, instantly staining the pristine fabric with a tide of crimson. "Get Dr. Volkov!" Dante yelled, pressing his own hands to Misha's chest, his face white. "Get him! Tell him it's a code! Get him now!" Leo, his gun drawn, was already on the phone. His face was grim. "Boss?" "What?" "Dr. Volkov he's gone. The ambush. It was his car Misha was in. Dr. Volkov is dead. Anton. He took out our healthcare provider." The air in the room evaporated. Dante's head snapped up, his gray eyes wild with a desperate, cold fury, locking with Elara's. For a single, agonizing second, Elara was frozen. The Ph.D. in her screamed, "I'm not an MD!" The woman in her screamed, "I can't." But the scientist looked at the dying man, at the frothy, pink-tinged blood bubbling at his lips, at the precise location of the wound, and she simply began to calculate. "He's drowning," she said. Her voice was not a shriek. It was a cold, sharp command. Dante, his hands soaked in his man's blood, stared at her. "He's drowning in his own blood," Elara snapped, her paralysis shattering. "He has a tension pneumothorax. His lung has collapsed. He'll be dead in 3 minutes if we stay here." She pointed at Dante. "You, keep pressure on that wound, all your weight." She pointed at the other, panicked-looking guard. "You, help me." She ran. Not to the bar for whiskey. Not to the bathroom for towels. She ran to her new, sterile, glass-walled office. She kicked the door open, her mind a high-speed forensic analysis of the problem. She ripped the heavy silicone tubing from the back of her brand-new $500,000 data server's liquid cooling system. She grabbed a sterile biopsy scalpel from a kit she'd had delivered for tissue cultures. "This is not a sterile field," she was muttering to herself, her brain running 1,000 risk management protocols. "This is a clinical nightmare. This is all I have." She sprinted back. Misha's gurgling was weaker. "Dante, move!" He looked at her, his eyes uncomprehending. "Move!" she roared, shoving the boss of the Volkov Bratva out of the way. "Hold him down!" Dante, for the first time in his life, looked utterly lost. But he did it. He and the other guard pinned Misha's shoulders. Elara ripped Misha's shirt open. "This is going to hurt him. I don't care." She felt for the space between the ribs. Her mind was a textbook. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. No, too high. Fourth or fifth. Go for the fourth. I hate this, she whispered. And then she drove the scalpel in. There was a wet, sickening pop, and Misha's body arched off the sofa in a silent, agonizing scream. Hold him! Elara yelled. A horrific, whistling spray of bloody air and fluid erupted from the hole. Elara didn't flinch. She grabbed the server tubing and jammed it into the wound, pushing it in deep. Oh, God! The other guard whispered, looking green. Shut up and breathe, Elara snapped. She grabbed an empty vodka bottle from the bar cart, poured the contents onto the floor, and plunged the other end of the tube into it, creating a makeshift one-way chest seal. The gurgling in Misha's throat stopped. He took a ragged, whistling but deep breath. He's breathing, Dante said, his voice rough with disbelief. Elara didn't answer. She was already working on the other wound. He's still bleeding out. The bullet's in his gut. This didn't save him. It bought him an hour. She looked up, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fire. The sofa was a bad call. My lab. Now. Your lab? It's the only sterile room we have. It has equipment. It has chemicals. It has light. Do you want him to live, or do you want him to bleed to... She stopped, not finishing the sentence. Dante didn't hesitate. Leo, get the car. Now. The rest of you. Help her. The ride down in the private elevator was a surreal, bloody nightmare. Elara was covered in Misha's blood, her hands pressed hard against the entry wound, her mind racing. They burst into the lobby of her new, pristine biotech building. The night shift security guard saw them. 2 men covered in blood, 1 man being carried, and a wild-eyed woman in designer loungewear. And just put his hands up, his eyes wide. My lab, Elara panted, hitting the elevator button. He's a clinical trial patient. It's a complication. The second the elevator doors opened to her floor, she was in command. Her lab, her gleaming multi-million-dollar temple of science, was about to become a trauma bay. Put him on that, she yelled, pointing to a heavy stainless steel autopsy table she'd had installed for... Well, not for this. They laid him out. The lights in the lab were a brilliant, shadowless white, illuminating the horror of the wound. I need, she said, looking around wildly. Her eyes landed on the terrified supply chain manager, who had been waiting for her at the cafe. He'd still been there, working late to catalog her new arrivals. He was frozen by the door. You! Elara shouted. He jumped. There is a private clinic, a hospital across the street. You are going to go there. You are going to tell them Dante Volkov needs 10 units of O-negative blood and 3 plasma packs. You are going to use his name, his credit, or you are going to threaten them, I don't care. Go! The man fled, scrambling for the elevator. Elara turned back to the room. Dante, Leo, and the other guard were just watching her. Waiting. This isn't a fucking surgery! Elara screamed, the adrenaline making her vision sharp. I can't take the bullet out. I don't know how, but I can stop him from bleeding to death before he gets to someone who can. Her eyes scanned her lab, her beautiful, expensive biotech equipment. Dante, I need an IV. I don't have one. What? A line, saline, anything. She looked at her shelves. My cell culturing logistics. The nutrient solution. It's sterile. It's mostly saline and glucose. You're going to put that in him? Leo asked, horrified. It's better than air, she shrieked. She grabbed the bag, an IV needle from a forensic kit, and tubing. Find a vein. You. She pointed at Dante. You're a boss. You've probably seen a few find a vein. Stunned, Dante grabbed Misha's arm and expertly found the vein, sliding the needle in. Elara hung the bag of experimental cell culture solution on a microscope stand and opened the line. It's not enough. He's bleeding internally. She looked at her chemical supply. My new protein folding simulator. The reagents. One of them is a coagulant. Elara, Dante said, his voice a low warning. That's experimental. Everything we are doing is experimental, she cried. He's a liability, Dante. He's bleeding out. I am a scientist. I innovate. Now, are you going to let me work, or are you going to watch your man die? Dante just stared at her. His gaze was... She couldn't place it. It wasn't anger. It was... awe. She grabbed the reagent. She drew it up. She found the entry wound, the source of the bleeding. This is going to hurt, she whispered again, and she injected the coagulant directly, internally, near where she guessed the primary bleeder was. They waited. 1 second. 2. The steady, dark ooze of blood from the wound slowed. It didn't stop, but it slowed. It thickened. It held. Misha, who had been pale as wax, seemed to get a flicker of color. Elara stood there, covered in blood, her hands shaking so violently she had to clench them. She was breathing in ragged, painful gasps. The room was silent, save for the hum of her freezers and Misha's whistling but steady breath. Leo was staring at her. The other guard was staring at her. And Dante? Dante was looking at her like he had never seen her before. The elevator hissed open. The terrified supply chain manager ran in, 2 hospital orderlies behind him, pushing a gurney and carrying coolers. They're here. Good, Elara breathed. He's stable. For now, he needs a real surgeon. But he's not dead. Dante barked orders. Leo and the guard took charge, transferring Misha to the gurney. To the clinic. Dr. Abelovich, tell him I'm on my way. The lab cleared out. The elevator doors hissed shut. It was over. It was just Elara and Dante alone in her new lab, which looked like a war zone. Blood was puddled on the floor. Her server tubing was in a vodka bottle. Her expensive reagents were used. Elara just stood in the center of the room, vibrating with the crash of the adrenaline. She looked down at her hands. They were caked in drying blood. Misha's blood. She started to shake. She was going to be sick. She was going to faint. My lab. A single, hot tear of shock traced a clean path through the blood on her cheek. Dante didn't speak. He just walked to her. She flinched, her body still screaming with tension. He didn't grab her. He didn't kiss her. He gently took her 2 trembling, bloody hands in his. His grip was warm and steady. He led her to the lab's emergency wash station, the one with the high-pressure faucets. He turned on the warm water. Dante, Shh. His voice was raw, unguarded. He took the harsh, orange-colored antiseptic soap from the dispenser. He pumped it into his own palm. And then he began to wash her hands. It was a reversal of their first 2 encounters. He was the one cleansing her. His large, calloused thumbs were meticulous, working the soap and warm water under her nails, over her knuckles, cleaning away the blood. His touch was not possessive. It wasn't sexual. It was tender. It was reverent. She started to cry. Not loud sobs, just silent, hiccuping, gasping sobs of shock and release. Her whole body shook. He didn't shush her. He just kept cleaning her hands, rinsing and soaping again, until all the blood was gone. He killed my doctor, Elara, Dante said, his voice a low, cold rumble, his eyes fixed on her hands. Anton, it was a message. He thought he was taking out my only medical asset. He was trying to make me vulnerable, to show me I had a liability in my organization. He turned off the water. He reached for a stack of sterile lab towels and gently, painstakingly, dried her hands, her wrists. He looked up, and his gray eyes, usually so cold, were burning with a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen. It was the awe she'd glimpsed earlier, but it was deeper. It was respect. He didn't know, Dante whispered, his voice rough, that I had already acquired a replacement. He held her clean, trembling hands. He didn't know that I had a lioness. He lifted her right hand, turned it over, and pressed a kiss, not of passion but of fealty, into her clean, soap-scented palm. You saved my family, mia dottoressa. He let go of one hand, only to slide his arm around her waist, pulling her trembling body against his. He held her. Just held her. Let's go home, he murmured into her hair. You did well. You need to rest. Chapter 8. The Final Diagnosis. The penthouse was silent. It was no longer the cold, sterile fortress she'd first entered. It was a recovery ward. Misha was stable, his prognosis positive according to the real surgeon Dante had black-bagged from the clinic he was recovering in one of the guest suites, with a private nurse. The war, however, was not over. Anton was still out there. Elara was in her new lab. It was 3 a.m. She couldn't sleep. Her lab, scrubbed clean by a forensic cleaning crew, was the only place she could think. She was running data analytics on Anton's known supply chain, cross-referencing shipping manifests with chemical precursors. She was no longer just a biochemist. She was a strategist. You should be sleeping. She didn't jump. She'd heard the elevator. She knew his footsteps. Dante was standing at the entrance of her lab, his shoulder braced against the doorframe. He was in dark sweats, his stitched shoulder, her original stitches, bare. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp. I can't, she said, not looking away from her screen. He's not just a thug, Dante. He's a chemist. He tried to poison you with an organophosphate. He killed your doctor. He's a liability that compounds interest. He won't stop. I know. He walked into the room, coming to stand behind her. He didn't touch her, but his heat was a presence at her back. He looked over her shoulder at the screen. You're mapping his logistics. I'm mapping his vulnerabilities, she corrected. He's not a gangster. He's a CEO. His pharmaceutical front isn't just a cover. It's his real business. His entire criminal portfolio is funded by his legitimate venture capital. He's not using his company to hide his crime. He's using his crime to fund his company. You're trying to cut off the head of a hydra. I'm looking for its heart. He was silent for a long moment, just watching her work. He underestimated you, he finally murmured. He thought you were a pet. A delightful accretion. He thought I was a damsel, Elara said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. He's about to find out he's dealing with a data breach he can't patch. The main lab elevator dinged. It was 3:15 a.m. Dante and Elara froze. They looked at each other. Leo was downstairs. No one came up without their approval. The elevator doors hissed open. It was Anton. He wasn't alone. He had 2 massive guards, but he was in the lead, a smug, confident smile on his face. He held up a keycard. Your security protocols are a little lax, Doctor. But then, this building is a publicly traded property, not a fortress. An easy acquisition. Dante had moved. He was in the shadows by the chemical stores, his hand inside his waistband. He was a silent, coiled panther. Anton hadn't seen him yet. I'm impressed, Elara, Anton said, walking into the lab, his guards fanning out. I heard about your clinical heroics. You saved Misha. It's a shame. All that talent, wasted on patching up thugs. What do you want, Anton? Elara said, slowly standing up, her hand resting on her workbench. I'm here to repeat my offer, he said, his smile widening. To get you out. I'm liquidating my assets in this city. It's become problematic. I'm moving my entire pharmaceutical operation to Zurich. I want you to run it. This is your last chance. Come with me, or go down with him. She's not going anywhere, Dante's voice echoed from the shadows. Anton spun, his smile vanishing. His men drew their guns, but Leo and 2 other Volkov guards were suddenly at the elevator, guns up. It was a standoff, a trap. So, Anton hissed, his eyes darting between them. The lioness and the lion, in the same den, a hostile takeover, Dante. You should have done your due diligence. I always have a contingency plan. The lights went out. The lab was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness, broken only by the red and green status lights of the equipment. A high-pitched alarm, a chemical hazard warning, began to shriek. Gas! Anton yelled. He's flooding the room. I'm not! Dante yelled back, his voice tight. It's me, you idiots! Elara shouted into the dark. Her eyes, adjusted to the gloom, could see everything. She was home. She'd hit the emergency purge switch, plunging the room into darkness and starting the high-powered ventilation. But she'd also hit something else. Anton's men fired blind, muzzle flashes illuminating the room in strobing, terrifying bursts. Dante returned fire. A bullet thwacked into the workbench near Elara's head. Dante roared her name. Elara! A large shadow, Anton, was lunging for her. He still thought she was the shield. He grabbed her, his arm locking around her throat. Stop, Dante, or your precious asset gets her throat cut. Wrong move, Anton, Elara choked out. Her hand, which had been on her workbench, was not empty. She was holding a large, industrial-sized wash bottle. You think a little water? Anton laughed, his arm tightening. It's not water, you liability, she hissed. She twisted in his grip and squeezed the bottle, spraying the contents. Not at his face, but at the open wound on Dante's shoulder, less than 5 feet away. Elara, no! Dante yelled, thinking she was hurting him. It's not for him, she screamed. The chemical, a highly concentrated, volatile alkali solution she used to clean protein residue, hit Dante's wound. Dante screamed. It was a raw, agonizing sound. But the chemical didn't just burn. It reacted. It hit the blood and the tissue and vaporized on his hot skin, creating an instantaneous, choking cloud of ammonia and caustic fumes. It was a chemical bomb. The vapor cloud hit Anton full in the face. He couldn't breathe. His eyes, his lungs, his throat were on fire. He released Elara, his hands clawing at his own face, screaming a wet, gurgling scream. Dante! Elara yelled, scrambling away. The floor! Dante, already choking, understood. He dropped. Elara hit the main fire suppression switch. Halon gas and foam flooded the room from the ceiling. The lights snapped back on. The noise was deafening. When the foam cleared, Leo and his men had Anton's 2 guards, and Dante was standing over a writhing, blinded, and choking Anton Mikhailov. Dante's gun was pressed to Anton's temple. His face was a mask of cold, absolute rage. His shoulder was a mess, the alkali burn raw and red. You came into my city, Dante whispered, his voice shaking with fury. You killed my men. You killed my doctor. And you touched her. He cocked the hammer. Don't. Elara's voice cut through the chaos. She was breathing hard, her lab coat soaked in foam, but her eyes were clear. Dante didn't look at her. He's a rabid dog, Elara. He needs to be put down. Don't, she said again, walking closer. She put her hand, not on him, but on his gun. Gently. Don't be stupid. His head snapped toward her. Stupid? You're a CEO, Dante, not just a boss. You're thinking like a thug. Think like me. She was calm. She was in charge. He's not a liability, she said, her voice low. He's the greatest asset you've ever acquired. He stared at her, not understanding. He's a chemist, right? With a legitimate pharmaceutical company? She continued, her logic cold and sharp. His entire supply chain, his patents, his clinical trials, they're all real. You kill him, his portfolio dissolves. His attorneys and shareholders will carve it up. It's gone. She tapped Anton's spluttering head with her finger. But him? He's a data breach waiting to be exploited. You don't kill him, Dante. You own him. You make him sign over his company, his patents, his life. You drain his accounts. You take his intellectual property. You make him your front. It's the ultimate hostile takeover. You don't just win the war. You win the peace. There was a long, ringing silence, broken only by Anton's painful gasps. Leo was staring at her with open-mouthed awe. Dante! Dante was looking at her like he was seeing the sun. He slowly lowered the gun. He looked at Anton, his rage replaced by a cold, calculating, and far more terrifying smile. You heard the doctor, he said, his voice a purr. Get him on his feet, Leo. Get our legal team. We have some acquisition papers for Mr. Mikhailov to sign. I suspect he'll be cooperative. Leo and his men hauled the blinded, broken man away. The lab was a chaotic, foamy, chemical-stinking mess. It was just them. The adrenaline crashed. Elara's knees buckled. Dante caught her, his good arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. You, he breathed, his face buried in her hair. You are terrifying. You're bleeding, she whispered, her hands on his chest. And I burned you. You did. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. You saved me. Again. We saved each other, she corrected, her voice shaky. The tension, the high-voltage wire that had snapped and sizzled between them for weeks, was finally at its breaking point. The plot was over. The rival was gone. There was nothing left between them but the truth. He didn't speak. He just scooped her up into his arms. Dante, your shoulder is fine, he growled, carrying her out of her lab and into the private elevator. The ride up to the penthouse was silent. He didn't put her down. He carried her through his living room, past the sofa where Misha had almost died, and into his bedroom. He kicked the door shut. He set her down gently on the edge of the massive, unmade bed. The city lights glittered behind him. He was a myth, a king, a monster. And he was hers. I need, she said, her voice a whisper. I need to examine you. The burn. Later, he said. He was in front of her, his hands coming up to cup her face. His thumb stroked her cheekbones, his gaze so intense it was a physical touch. You stopped me, he murmured. No one stops me. You were being an unoptimized asset, she whispered, her hands trembling as she placed them on his waist. You're not just my consultant, Elara, he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. You're not my doctor. You're not my asset. What am I? She asked, her eyes fluttering shut. He kissed her. It was not the bruising, claiming kiss from the elevator. It was not the almost kiss in the lab. It was a surrender. It was a deep, soul-shattering kiss of equals, a kiss of respect, a kiss of raw, desperate, agonizing need that had been held in check for so long it was explosive. He pulled back, his lips brushing hers. "You're my final diagnosis." He kissed her again, and this time there was no stopping. He pulled the soaked, ruined lab coat from her shoulders. She fumbled with the hem of his sweater, her fingers desperate to touch the skin beneath. It was a tangle of limbs, a frantic shedding of liabilities and armor, until it was just them. He laid her back on the bed, his body a hot, possessive weight on top of hers. "You're no surgeon, Dottoressa," he whispered, his voice a raw growl against her skin as he kissed a path down her throat. "You're something far more lethal." She arched into his touch, her mind, her body, her soul finally, completely and irrevocably acquired. "You're my cure." Chapter 9. The morning after the merger. Elara woke to the sound of nothing. No sirens, no alarms, no humming freezers. Just the silent, steady breathing of the man beside her and the muted rush of city traffic, 20 stories below. The light was the first thing she noticed. It was a pale, late-morning gold, streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a galaxy of dust motes. It was the softest light she had ever seen. The sheets were softer, a thread count so high it was probably a trade secret. The second thing she noticed was the soreness. It was a deep, pleasant, thrumming ache in muscles she hadn't known she possessed. A souvenir. The third thing was the arm draped over her waist. It was heavy, possessive, and warm. She turned her head slowly. Dante was awake. He was lying on his good side, propped up on an elbow, just watching her. His black hair was a mess, falling over his forehead. His face, stripped of its CEO mask and its Bratva fury, was quiet, unguarded, and sinfully handsome in the morning light. A slow, wolfish smile touched his lips. "Good morning, Dottoressa." Elara's brain, usually so quick with data analysis, took a moment to boot up. Her first instinct was fear. Her second was not. "Good morning," she whispered. Her voice was a low, scratchy purr. "How's the patient?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Sore," she admitted. "I feel like I've just been through a very aggressive, very thorough acquisition." "A merger?" he corrected, his smile widening. His thumb drew a lazy circle on her bare hip. "And I'd say the negotiation was a resounding success. For all parties." "I'll need to review the contract," she murmured, stretching, the sheet pooling around her waist. "My legal counsel, i.e., me, is worried about the liability." "The liability is all mine, Mia." He leaned in and kissed her, slow and deep. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss from the night before. This was a kiss of ownership, a kiss of morning. It tasted of sleep and him. When he pulled back, her brain was finally online, and her scientific, bossy, brilliant mind took over. "Sit up," she ordered. His eyebrows rose. "Bossy, No, I'm serious. Sit up." She scrambled out of the bed, completely unself-conscious in her nudity, and stalked into the massive bathroom. She returned a moment later with a first aid kit. He was sitting on the edge of the bed as instructed, the sheet tangled at his waist, watching her with a dangerously amused expression. His body was a tapestry of his life. Old, faint scars, the puckered, angry red of her original stitches on his left shoulder, and now, the new, raw, chemical burn on his right, where she'd splashed him. "This," she said, her doctor voice firmly in place as she perched on the bed in front of him, "is a liability." She began to gently clean the burn. I could have blinded you, I could have scarred you for life. It was a reckless, insane, unoptimized risk. It was, he agreed, his voice soft. The most brilliant thing I've ever seen. He didn't flinch as the antiseptic stung. His eyes were locked on her face, on the fierce concentration in her brow. You were magnificent. I was lucky, she muttered, applying a salve. The due diligence on that maneuver was non-existent. My hypothesis was that it would create a vapor, if I'd been wrong. You weren't. He captured her free hand, the one not dabbing at his skin, and brought it to his lips. You never are. The simple act of tenderness, of fealty, from this man. It short-circuited her brain more effectively than any violence. He was hers. And she, God help her, was his. His phone on the bedside table began to buzz, a discreet, insistent sound. Dante sighed, his brief moment of peace over. He was still holding her hand as he reached over and answered, putting it on speaker. What? Leo's voice, as flat as ever, came through. Boss, morning. The acquisition is proceeding. Anton? Dante asked, his eyes never leaving Elara's. He's in one of our private clinics, blindfolded. His legal team is with him. They're cooperative. Good, Dante said. Our team is drawing up the asset transfer documents now. He's signing over his controlling interest in Mikhailov Biologics, all intellectual property, patents, and offshore portfolios, in exchange for health and safe passage to an undisclosed location. His words. He'll get his safe passage, Dante said, a cold smile touching his lips. A nice, quiet retirement in Siberia. See to it. Yes, boss, and, Misha. He's alive, Dante said. It wasn't a question. He's alive, Leo confirmed. The surgeon said the, internal coagulant was revolutionary. He wants to know the chemical formulation. Elara snorted. That's proprietary data. Tell him to submit a grant proposal. Dante's chest rumbled with a low laugh. You heard the doctor. What else, Leo? He's awake, and he's refusing to see the post-op nurse. He says, he only wants his doctor, the lioness. He's convinced you've hired a science witch. Elara buried her face in her hands. I am not making house calls for the Bratva. My malpractice insurance won't cover it. I'm a CEO, not a mafia witch. She's busy, Leo, Dante said, his voice thick with amusement. Send him a fruit basket. On my account. He hung up and tossed the phone aside. He turned his full attention back to Elara, who was trying and failing to look stern. A science witch, he mused, pulling her onto his lap. She yelped, her arms going around his neck. Don't, she warned. Your shoulder, your burns, are irrelevant. He settled her against his chest, his good arm locking around her waist. Mikhailov Biologics, a multi-billion-dollar biotech empire. It's yours. She stared at him. What? I don't want it. It's his. It's ours, he corrected. It's your new lab, your clean portfolio. You wanted clinical trials? You wanted FDA approval? You have it. You're the CEO and chief research officer. You're legitimate. She was speechless. He wasn't just giving her a cage. He was giving her the world, the one she'd wanted, the one Anton had offered. But he was giving it to her on her terms, backed by his power. And my other job? She whispered, her fingers tracing the healed stitches on his left shoulder. The Mafia scientist? That, he said, is your consulting gig, for your primary client. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. And I am a very demanding client. I require constant personal risk assessment. My compensation package had better be astronomical, she breathed, her body melting against his. Oh, it will be, he murmured, his hand sliding up her side. I'm a very generous investor. He kissed her, and this time it was slow and deep and full of promises. It was the future. It was the sealing of their new, unspoken contract. An hour later, Elara was padding around his kitchen, wearing nothing but one of his long-sleeved black t-shirts, which barely grazed her thighs. She was making coffee, real coffee, in a French press. Dante walked in, wearing only a pair of black sweatpants, his bare chest a roadmap of her handiwork. Stitches, burns, and, she noted with a small, proud smile, several fresh bruises on his collarbone. He looked domestic. Lethally, beautifully domestic. He came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his lips at her neck. This is new, she murmured, leaning back into his embrace, the smell of coffee and him a heady, perfect combination. This, he said, is the new normal. This is our venture. She poured 2 cups, her hands steady. She passed one to him. To Volkov Hayes Solutions? She suggested, a smile in her voice. A merger and acquisition for the ages. He clinked his mug against hers. His gray eyes, no longer cold, were on fire with a look that was all hers. To the lioness, he said, and her very, very satisfied client. Chapter 10. The Science Witch of the Bratva. 3 days. It took Elara exactly 3 days to realize that being the CEO of a legitimate multi-billion-dollar biotech empire was, well, boring. She was drowning. Not in blood or chemical fires, but in paperwork. She sat at her gleaming workstation in the penthouse, juggling 3 virtual meetings, one with a team of bewildered attorneys in Zurich, one with her new chief financial officer, who was terrified of her, and one with a logistics manager about the supply chain for a new clinical trial in Japan. The due diligence on the 3rd quarter projections is flawed, she snapped at her CFO, who was a tiny, pixelated square on her screen. Their data models are archaic. We're liquidating the entire wellness portfolio and reinvesting the capital in hard biochemical research. Send me the new balance sheets by 5. She clicked end meeting without waiting for a reply. She was in boss mode. She wore Bottega Veneta reading glasses, a welcome gift from Dante, and a silk blouse, her hair in a severe no-nonsense knot. Dante walked in, a silent shadow in one of his perfect, dark gray suits. He was in Bratva boss mode. He simply stood there sipping an espresso and watched her. What? She finally asked, not looking up from a legal brief. We have a meeting. I'm in 3 meetings, Dante. Tell Leo to reschedule the asset management review. This isn't an asset management review, he said. He walked over and gently closed her laptop. This is a clinical consultation. Elara's head snapped up. Is Misha? Misha is a liability, Dante said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He's refusing his post-op prognosis. He says the surgeon you sent, Dr. Abelovich, is a quack. Dr. Abelovich is a board-certified trauma surgeon, Elara protested, rubbing her temples. He's probably the best healthcare provider on your payroll. Misha doesn't want the provider, Dante said, holding out his hand. He wants the science witch. He's convinced you're going to put, and I quote, his guts back in with a laser and a laptop. Elara groaned. I am not a witch, and my malpractice insurance does not cover this. I am a CEO. I have shareholders. You are the shareholder, Mia. He tugged her hand, pulling her to her feet. And your first and primary client requires your unique expertise. Consider it. Client relations? The meeting was not at the penthouse. It was at a high-end, unmarked social club in the old financial district. A place that smelled of old leather, whiskey, and asset protection. The asset protection in this case was 6 of the largest men Elara had ever seen, all of whom looked at her with a terrifying new expression. Reverence. As Dante led her through the main room, hand possessively on her lower back, the men, captains, soldiers, killers, parted for her like the Red Sea. They nodded. They murmured, "Dottoressa." One of them actually made a small sign of the cross. "This is ridiculous," she whispered to Dante. "They look at me like I'm going to turn them into yeast." "They're terrified of you," Dante murmured back, his voice thick with pride. "You're the woman who bossed me around. You're the one who faced down Anton Mikhailov with a spray bottle. To them, you are a witch, and they love you for it." They entered a private back room. It had been converted into a high-tech private clinic. Misha was sitting up on a bed, his massive, tattooed torso bare. He looked miserable. And he was not alone. Dr. Abelovich, a grizzled older man with the perpetually exhausted eyes of a war surgeon, was standing in the corner, his arms crossed. He did not look reverent. He looked annoyed. "Ah, the lioness arrives," Abelovich grunted, his Russian accent thick, to bless the patient with her server parts. "Doctor," Elara said, her voice crisp, all CEO. She completely ignored him and walked to the bed. "Misha, I hear you're being a liability." The giant soldier, the man she'd seen take a step toward a gun, actually flinched. "Dottoressa, you came." "Of course I came," she snapped, picking up his chart. "I don't like my experiments to fail. And you, Misha, are a very expensive, very difficult experiment. Lie back." He did, immediately. She began the exam. She was not the panicked, adrenaline-fueled woman from the lab. She was a scientist. Her hands were firm, clinical, and impersonal. She checked the chest tube scar. She palpated his abdomen, checking the long, neat line of Abelovich's stitches. "Vitals are stable," Abelovich said from the corner. "But he has a low-grade fever. The antibiotics are not as effective as I'd like. The internal trauma, your coagulant, it saved him. But it's not a recognized pharmaceutical." "It's a reagent," Elara said, not looking at him. "A synthetic peptide designed to mimic platelet aggregation. Of course it's not recognized. I invented it. Misha was its first human trial." Abelovich's eyebrows shot up. You invented it?" "She did," Dante said, his voice a proud rumble from the doorway. He was just leaning there, watching, making it clear to everyone in the room who she belonged to. "His liver enzymes are high," Elara murmured, reading the chart. "It's the stress. The coagulant is taxing his system. He needs a biotech solution, not just a pharmaceutical one." She turned to Abelovich. The air in the room crackled. The new guard versus the old. "You're giving him a standard broad-spectrum antibiotic," she said. "It is the protocol," he defended. "It's lazy," she retorted. "His system is compromised. We don't need a sledgehammer, we need a scalpel." She looked at Misha. "Did you take a culture of the infection, doctor? Or did you just guess?" Abelovich's face flushed. "There was no time for—" "There's always time for data." Elara turned to one of the guards. "Get me a sterile tray and a microscope, now." For the next hour, Elara worked. She turned a corner of the clinic into her new lab. She bossed everyone. She took a culture. She ran a stain. She commandeered Abelovich's computer to run a quick analysis. Dante just watched, a small, lethally satisfied smile on his face. "There," she finally said, pointing to the microscope. "You see?" Abelovich, his skepticism long since evaporated, leaned over the eyepiece. He was silent for a full minute. Bog. My God. It's not a standard staph infection, Elara explained, her professor voice emerging. It's a rare, chemically resistant strain. Probably something he picked up from one of Anton's old labs. Your antibiotic was just irritating it. So what do we do? Abelovich asked. He was no longer her rival. He was her student. Elara went to the small, secure fridge where she'd had Leo store her supplies. She pulled out a small, unassuming vial of clear liquid. We fight a biochemical agent with a better one, she said. This is a growth factor solution, an experimental reagent I developed for my neurodegenerative research. It encourages healthy cells to outcompete and destroy compromised ones. It's not an antibiotic. It's a corporate restructuring on a cellular level. She drew the liquid into a syringe. This, she said to Misha, who was watching her with the wide, trusting eyes of a child, will make you feel much better. Or it might give you a third arm. The clinical data is limited. Misha just nodded. Da, Dottoressa, whatever you say. She injected the solution into his IV line. The effect was not instant. But over the next 10 minutes, as she monitored his vitals on the screen, his fever ticked down. A full, startling degree. Abelovich was staring at the monitor. Incredible! The prognosis. This is magic. It's not magic, Elara said, packing up her things. It's just data-driven healthcare. You should try it sometime. She snapped her case shut and turned to Misha. You're no longer my problem, Misha. You're Dr. Abelovich's. Listen to him. And rest. That's an order, soldier. Yes, Dottoressa! She strode out of the room. Dante, after giving a curt nod to Abelovich, followed her. The walk back through the main club was the same, only more so. The men parted, their awe now mixed with the fresh rumors that were no doubt flying from the clinic. She healed Misha with a single shot. The science witch. They got into the back of the waiting sedan. The partition glided up. Elara let out a breath she'd been holding for an hour. My God, your men are a liability. And Abelovich, he's a good surgeon, but his biotech knowledge is archaic. Dante didn't say anything. He was just watching her, his gray eyes incandescent. What? She asked, her bravado fading. Was I too hard on them? I'm not used to this client-facing role. You, he said, his voice a low, rough growl. We're magnificent. He lunged across the small space, pulling her onto his lap, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was all fire and possession. It wasn't the fury of the elevator or the tenderness of the morning. This was pride. This was a king, showing off his queen and being dazzled by her. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. Bossing around my captains, he whispered, his lips brushing her skin. Turning my best surgeon into your lab assistant. Terrifying my toughest soldiers into submission. He kissed her again hard. It's a new acquisition I am finding. I quite enjoy. I'm a very, very satisfied client, Dottoressa. Good, she breathed, her hands tangling in his hair, all thoughts of shareholders and legal briefs dissolving, because my consulting fees are about to go way up. Chapter 11. The Queen's Portfolio. The new normal was, Elara decided, exponentially more stressful than the old. Being the CEO of Mikhailov Biologics, which she had promptly, and with no small amount of satisfaction, rebranded as Apex Clinical Solutions, was not a job. It was a 24-hour hostile takeover of her life. Her lab was now a corner office on the 50th floor with a view that could cure vertigo. And her days were a relentless gauntlet of legal briefings, portfolio reviews, and firing Anton's overpaid, underperforming executives. She was terminating a supply chain contract with a condescending man in Germany via video call. "Your logistics are a liability, Herr Schmidt. Consider this your final due diligence," when Dante walked in. He didn't just walk in. He flowed into the room, a silent, dark-suited predator, and simply began making himself a drink at her new, very well-stocked bar. He wasn't her boss here. He wasn't her captor. He was, in the eyes of her new, terrified and very confused staff, Mr. Volkov, the primary investor. "This entire pharmaceutical venture is being restructured, and your contract is non-compliant," she snapped at the screen. "My attorneys will be in touch." She slammed the laptop shut and rubbed the bridge of her nose, the Bottega glasses sliding down. "I swear to God, Dante, if you're here to tell me Misha has a rash, I will personally put him in a clinical trial for something agonizing." "No rashes," he rumbled, his voice full of amusement. He crossed the room, his movements liquid and silent. He set a glass of scotch on her desk, a silent peace offering, before leaning back against it, caging her in, "He's fine. He sent you flowers. Again." "Oh, great," she sighed, gesturing to the corner of her office, which now resembled a high-end funeral home. It was overflowing with opulent, slightly terrifying floral arrangements from grateful Bratva soldiers. "It's like a Mafia-themed flower subscription. My new secretary thinks I'm dating a cartel." "You are," he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, his voice a low vibration that short-circuited her CEO brain. "We're going out tonight." Elara blinked. "Out? Like, out? As in a restaurant? With civilians?" In the month since the merger, their time had been spent in the penthouse, in her lab, or in meetings. They had not once gone on what her old life would have called a date. "Something like that," he said. His eyes were doing that thing. That hot, analytical, possessive thing that made her want to run a full diagnostic on her own nervous system. "Be ready at 8, and Dottoressa, Your lab coat won't do. Wear the red one." The red one was not a lab coat. It was a sin. It was a dress he'd had acquired for her, a column of scarlet silk that clung to every curve and had a neckline that was a hostile action against gravity. She was suddenly, acutely nervous. "Dante, where are we going? This isn't another poker game, is it? Because my risk assessment of that—" "It's not a poker game," he said, and his voice was serious now. He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "It's a board meeting of my other portfolio, my captains, my lieutenants. It's time to formally introduce the new management." The bottom dropped out of her stomach. This wasn't a date. This was her presentation. This was the lioness being shown to the rest of the pride, a pride made of killers and racketeers. "Oh," she said, her voice small. I think I'd rather face Anton with a spray bottle." "You'll be fine," he murmured, kissing the pulse point on her neck. "You're not there to be liked, Elara. You're there to be feared. You already are. This is just a formality." "They're going to eat me alive," she whispered, her hands fisting in his suit jacket. "Let them try," he growled, his voice a promise of violence. "I'd like to see them." The event was held in a massive, vaulted, cathedral-like hall that Elara was fairly certain was the secret, underground headquarters of the entire Volkov Bratva. The air was thick with cigar smoke, expensive whiskey, and testosterone. 100 men in dark, expensive suits, the real assets of his empire, filled the room. When they walked in, a silence so profound it was almost violent fell over the crowd. Dante was in a black, custom-tailored suit that made him look like a god of the underworld, and Elara, on his arm in her scarlet dress, her hair swept up in an elegant, severe twist, felt like the sacrificial offering. "They're all staring," she whispered, her hand tightening on his arm. "Let them," he said. He didn't just walk. He prowled, leading her to the head table on the dais. He held her chair, and the entire room watched as he seated her. It was a gesture of a king seating his queen. The dinner was a blur. The food was exquisite. Elara was sure it was, though she couldn't taste it. The men watched her. They didn't leer. It was worse. They assessed, they sized her up, their eyes cold. She was the science witch, the CEO of the new legitimate empire, the woman who had apparently saved Misha with magic and defeated Anton with a lab chemical. She was a curiosity, a new volatile variable in their world. Then, the toasts began. A broad-shouldered man with a face like a block of granite and eyes as old as time stood up. Leo, sitting 2 seats down, leaned in. "Grigory? Old guard? He ran the logistics before your Apex computers. He dislikes optimization." Grigory raised his glass of vodka. "To Dante," he said, his voice a gravelly boom, "to our bratva, and," his eyes fixed on Elara, "to the new acquisitions." The room was silent. It was a challenge, a subtle, deeply misogynistic dismissal. She wasn't management. She was property. An accretion, just like Anton had called her. Dante's hand tensed on the table. She could feel the rage rolling off him. He was about to stand, about to verbally or physically end the man. Elara placed her hand on his. A silent, "No, mine." She stood up. The room, which had started to murmur, fell silent again. She was a column of scarlet fire in a sea of black suits. She picked up her own glass. Of water. "To acquisitions," she said, her voice clear and carrying, her CEO mode voice. It was not loud, but it cut through the smoke like a scalpel. She looked at Grigory, her gaze as cold and clinical as if she were looking at a flawed data model. "When I first joined this organization, I too was concerned about the portfolio. It was redundant, inefficient. It relied on outdated protocols and carried far too many underperforming liabilities." A few men shifted. Grigory's face darkened. "But now," Elara continued, her voice warming slightly, "I see the potential. I see an investment that, with a little aggressive restructuring, could dominate the market." She raised her glass high. "A good CEO knows when to liquidate a failing asset." Her eyes bored into Grigory. "And when to invest heavily in a promising one. Dante Volkov did not just make an acquisition. He made a merger. He secured the future. He optimized the Bassa." She turned her gaze from Grigory and addressed the entire silent room. "I am not just a doctor. I am your new chief strategist. I am the asset that makes your other assets profitable. My pharmaceuticals will heal you. My logistics will protect you. And my data analytics will find your enemies before they find you. I am not here to be acquired. I am here to ensure that we are the only ones left doing the acquiring." She smiled, a cold, sharp lioness smile. "So yes, to acquisitions, and to the ROI they bring." She drank her water. For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute stunned silence. Grigory was pale. Then Misha, sitting at a table near the front, his arm in a sling, stood up. He slammed his fist on the table and roared, "To the Dottoressa! The science witch!" The room erupted. It was a deafening, thunderous roar of approval. Men were on their feet, glasses raised. "Dottoressa! Dottoressa!" Elara sat down, her heart hammering, her body thrumming with adrenaline. Dante didn't say a word. He just leaned over, his hand covering hers on the table. Under the cover of the noise, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes burning into hers. The look in them. It was a promise of a very, very thorough debriefing. The ride home was silent, but it was the loudest silence she had ever known. The air in the back of the sedan was electric, the tension a screaming physical thing. The second the penthouse elevator doors hissed shut, he had her. He pressed her against the cool, mirrored wall, his body a hard, possessive brand. "A hostile takeover, Elara?" He growled, his voice a low, rough rasp against her throat. "Using corporate language to threaten my oldest captain?" "He called me property," she breathed, her hands fisting in his jacket. "I had to clarify the terms of the merger." "Oh, you clarified them." His mouth was on her jaw, her neck, his lips leaving a trail of fire. "My chief strategist, my lioness. My God, you have no idea." He kissed her. A deep, ravaging, prideful kiss that tasted of whiskey, power, and absolute possession. He broke away, his breath hot on her lips. "That performance," he panted, "was exceptional." "And what?" she whispered, her head falling back as his lips found the sensitive skin of her collarbone. "Is the bonus structure for an exceptional chief strategist?" "The bonus structure," he murmured, his hands sliding up her ribs, his thumbs grazing the sides of her breasts, "is extensive." He lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her from the elevator. "And I," he growled, his gaze fixed on hers as he strode toward the bedroom, "am a very generous client who always pays his debts. In full." Chapter 12. The Civilian Liability. The debriefing was, Elara concluded, less a bonus structure and more a complete corporate restructuring of her entire nervous system. She woke up in her own bed, in her own penthouse, Dante having officially moved his primary assets into her lab building, which he now co-owned. The morning light was sharp, and the man beside her was already on his phone, a dark, velvet-covered liability in her sheets. "The shipping logistics are unacceptable," he was rumbling into the phone, his Mafia Boss voice already in full swing. "I don't care about the customs due diligence, you will make it happen, or I will personally liquidate your entire operation." He hung up, the click sounding final and violent in the quiet room. Elara, propped up on an elbow, hair a tangled mess, raised an eyebrow. "Optimizing the supply chain before coffee? That's aggressive." Dante turned, his gray eyes still soft from sleep, taking her in. A slow, possessive smile, the one reserved only for her, spread across his face. He tossed the phone aside and pulled her against him, his warm, bare skin a shocking contrast to his ice-cold business demeanor. "I have a demanding clientele," he murmured, his lips finding the pulse point on her neck. "And I have a very demanding chief strategist who requires significant compensation. My consulting fees are high," she breathed, her hands sliding up his hard chest. "They're astronomical," he agreed, his mouth moving to hers, "and worth every single cent." This was their new normal. A dizzying, terrifying, and intoxicating blend of high-stakes corporate management and high-stakes them. They were a merger of two empires. Apex Clinical Solutions, her gleaming, legitimate pharmaceutical powerhouse, and the Volkov Bratva, his dark, sprawling, and untouchable portfolio of other things. An hour later, Elara was every inch the CEO. She was in her own office, a glass and steel expanse that was, as she'd demanded, one floor above Dante's. She was reviewing the R&D projections for a new clinical trial based on her own protein-folding research. This was it. The dream. Real science, funded by an empire she had helped secure. She was finally changing the world. Her private line rang, not her intercom, not her secure Volkov network phone, her old personal cell phone which she kept in a drawer, charged but silent, a relic of a life she'd liquidated. Her blood went cold. No one called that number. Leo had handled her old life. He'd facilitated a severance package for her old landlord, managed her student loan debt. By managed, she assumed he'd bought the entire debt servicing company, and ensured her past was a neat, tidy, closed account. She stared at the screen. The name flashing was a ghost. Dr. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, her best friend from the old lab, the only person she'd ever shared data models with over cheap pizza and beer. A woman who was brilliant, kind, messy, and fundamentally, terrifyingly civilian. Elara snatched the phone, her heart hammering a hole in her chest. Sarah? Oh my God, Elara! You're alive! Sarah's voice was a high, frantic sob. It was the sound of the real world, the old world, crashing into Elara's new sterile fortress. Elara, I thought you were dead. I thought he'd killed you. One day you're here, complaining about Peterson's grant proposals, and the next, you're gone. Your apartment, your job, just poof. And then Peterson gets fired, and this new terrifying LLC buys the whole wing of the hospital, and I've been so worried. Sarah, slow down, Elara said, her voice dropping, her eyes darting to her office's glass door. She hit the switch to frost the glass, cocooning herself. I'm fine, I'm safe. It's complicated. Complicated. Elara, it's Dante Volkov. I Googled him. He's a monster. He's a private equity ghoul who eats companies. I thought he'd kidnapped you, that you were in a basement somewhere. I'm not in a basement, Sarah, Elara said, pinching the bridge of her nose. I'm in my office. I'm the CEO of my own company now. It was a very fast, very aggressive acquisition of my research. It's what I've always wanted. A CEO? Elara, what are you talking about? That's insane. You can't just vanish. I know. I'm sorry. It was a very complex negotiation. I had to sign a lot of NDAs. I couldn't call. Elara hated the lie. It tasted like ash. This was her best friend. An NDA. Right. Sarah's voice was shaky, skeptical. Well, Oh God, Elara, I did something stupid. A cold, prickling premonition crawled up Elara's spine. What did you do, Sarah? I went to the police. The words hit Elara like a physical blow. Police. The one variable she and Dante had never, ever discussed. The one entity his guns and money couldn't just buy. You... what? I filed a missing persons report. Sarah was crying now. 2 weeks ago, and they didn't believe me. They treated me like I was crazy, like I was a jealous ex-colleague. They said a high-powered investment firm just does things like this. That a new CEO doesn't have time to call her old friends. Okay, Elara said, her mind racing, running 1,000 panicked risk assessments. Okay, Sarah, that's fine. It's a misunderstanding. You call them. You call them right now, and you tell them you found me. You tell them you're an idiot, you overreacted, and you're embarrassed. Retract the report. Retract it. I can't. What do you mean you can't? Elara's voice was sharp, the lioness bleeding through. They didn't believe me, Sarah sobbed. So, I had to give them proof. I had to show them he was a criminal. I stayed up for a week. I did some forensic accounting on his public portfolio, all his shell companies, his asset management funds. I found things, Elara. Things. And I sent it all to a detective. A Detective Harding. I think I proved he was a monster just to get them to find you. Elara Hayes, CEO, Chief Strategist, and Science Itch of the Bratva, dropped the phone. It clattered to her desk. She stared at it. Her blood not just cold, but gone. A missing persons report was one thing. A civilian handing a detective a full, data-driven analysis of Dante's financial holdings. That wasn't a liability, that was a death sentence. That was the end of everything. She was vaguely aware of her office door opening. She was too numb to react. Dante walked in. He was not smiling. The warm, sated lover from the morning was gone. The Mafia Boss was back. His face was carved from glacial ice. He, too, was holding a phone. "Leo just received a high-priority alert," he said, his voice a low, deadly flatline that was more terrifying than any roar. "From one of our assets, inside the 12th precinct." He didn't move. He just stood there, a black-suited statue of judgment, 10 feet from her desk. "A Detective Harding has just formally requested the full, unredacted financial statements and incorporation documents for Apex Clinical Solutions, Hayes Clinical Solutions, LLC, and my personal family trust." He looked up from his phone, his gray eyes so cold she felt the chill across the room. "He's citing evidence of criminal conspiracy and racketeering." He took one slow, deliberate step toward her desk. "Tell me, Mia," he whispered, his voice a razor blade in the silent glass office. "Who is Dr. Sarah Jenkins?" Chapter 13. The Confrontation. The question hung in the vast, silent, glass-walled office like a guillotine. "Who is Dr. Sarah Jenkins?" Elara stared at her old phone. Sarah's tinny, panicked voice was still leaking from the speaker. "Elara? Are you there? Elara, please say something. I think I hear someone." Elara's hand, trembling, fumbled for the speakerphone button, silencing her friend. She looked up at Dante. He hadn't moved. He was a statue of bespoke dark gray wool, an avatar of cold, lethal judgment. The lover from the morning, the man who had kissed her senseless, was gone. This was the Mafia Boss. This was the man who had signed off on a retirement in Siberia. "Dante," she breathed, her voice a reedy, pathetic thing. "You don't understand." "I understand," he said, his voice a flat, dead calm that was infinitely more terrifying than his roar. "I understand that a detective is using forensic accounting to dismantle my portfolio. I understand that his evidence came from a ghost. A ghost from your past. A ghost you never told me existed." "She's not a ghost," Elara said, standing so fast her chair screeched. She's my friend. My best friend. From the old lab. She's a civilian. She doesn't know anything." "She doesn't." Dante took a slow, deliberate step toward her desk. The CEO's desk. Her new throne. It suddenly felt like an executioner's block. "She's a civilian who doesn't know anything, but she somehow managed to run a data analysis on my shell corporations. She somehow bypassed my attorneys, my accountants, and my entire asset protection team to find the seams in my logistics? A file, Elara, that she then handed to the police?" "She was worried," Elara cried, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. "She thought you'd kidnapped me. She thought you'd killed me. She was trying to save me." "She was trying to save you." He was at the desk now. He looked down at her, his gray eyes 2 chips of Arctic ice. "You're a brilliant woman, Elara. You're my chief strategist, so strategize. Run the risk assessment. Your friend just declared war on my bratva. She just put a target on my family. On Misha. On Leo." He leaned in, his hands braced on her desk, his voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated with suppressed violence. "She just put a target on you." "No." "Yes," he hissed. "This detective, this Harding, he now has a legitimate reason to seize your assets, our assets. Apex Clinical Solutions. He's not just coming for me, Mia. He's coming for your clinical trials, your pharmaceutical company, your dream. Your friend just handed our enemies the knife and told them where to stab. The blood drained from her face. She hadn't seen it that way. She had only seen Sarah. He saw the full board. "Dante," she whispered, her hands coming up in a pleading gesture. "Please, she's innocent. She was scared. She's not a variable in your game. She's a person, my only friend. You can't just..." She couldn't say it. Liquidate. "I can't just..." "What?" His voice was soft. "Handle the liability? Neutralize the security breach? What would you advise, Dottoressa? As my chief strategist, what is your protocol for an existential threat?" "She is not a threat. She's a biochemist." "Then how?" he asked, his voice becoming even quieter, silkier. "Did she know where to look?" Elara froze. The air in the room became thin, unbreathable. "What? What do you mean?" "I am not a public entity. My portfolio is a maze of private equity and offshore accounts that would take a forensic team years to unravel." He was closer now, his face inches from hers. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, a scent that had, an hour ago, been her comfort. Now it was the smell of the executioner. A simple civilian lab tech. She just guesses? She just happens to know how to connect Volkov Asset Management to a Shell LLC in the Caymans? She just stumbles upon the data? He watched her, his eyes analytical, cold, and utterly, devastatingly disappointed. "No," he whispered. "She didn't find it. She was told." The accusation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She stumbled back. "What? What are you saying? You gave her the roadmap, Elara?" His voice finally cracked, the cold fury breaking, revealing the white-hot core of betrayal beneath. "You, who I gave everything. You, who I pulled from that basement. You, who I made a queen." "No! You lied to me!" he roared, slamming his fist on her desk. The action was so sudden, so violent, it made her flinch. "You told me your past was clean. You told me there was no one. You sat in my car, you stood in my house, you slept in my bed, and you held back the one asset that could destroy me. You lied to me, Elara. You lied." I didn't, she sobbed, the tears finally coming, hot, terrified, angry tears. I would never betray you. How can you think that? We talked. Years ago, we were just colleagues. We'd complain about the grant proposals, about the hospital finances, how the budget allocation was a mess. She stopped. Her own words hung in the air. Dante's face became a mask of cold, dawning horror. You talked about my finances after you were with me?" "No, years before, I didn't know you. I might have said something about shell companies. I don't know, Dante, I don't remember." "You don't remember," he repeated. His voice was dead again. He had his answer. She was a data breach, an unintentional one perhaps, but the damage was the same. She was the loose end, she was the one who had just burned his empire to the ground. He stepped back. The confrontation was over. The assessment was done. He was pulling away from her, his face shuttered, closed. He was the Mafia Boss again, and he was making a final diagnosis. "Dante," she whispered, her entire future and Sarah's hanging on this one terrible moment. "Dante, look at me." He did. His eyes were empty. "I did not betray you," she said, and her voice was no longer a sob. It was the lioness. It was the CEO. It was cold, hard, and absolute. "I may have been stupid. I may have been naive, but I am not a traitor. She found it on her own. She is my mistake, my liability, and you are not going to hurt her. She was challenging him. She, the woman who was his asset, his creation, was giving him an order. He stared at her for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. The air in the room was so thick she could barely breathe. Finally, he gave a single, curt nod. "You're right," he said, his voice flat. "I'm not going to hurt her." Elara almost collapsed in relief. Her knees went weak. "You are," he finished. Her head snapped up. "What?" "She is your liability, Dottoressa," he said, walking to the door. "So you will handle the protocol. You will clean up your own mess. You are going to go to your friend. You are going to convince her to retract her statement. You are going to retrieve every piece of data she has. You are going to ensure her absolute permanent silence." He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "You will prove to me right now where your loyalty lies. With the past, or with me." And if I can't?" she whispered, her heart cold. If she won't listen?" Dante looked back, his eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky. "Then I will handle her, and my protocol is not clinical." He opened the door. Leo was standing there, his face a grim mask. "Get the car," Dante ordered. "The Dottoressa has a civilian meeting to attend." Chapter 14. The Alliance of the Broken. The ride was a pressurized hell. The black, bulletproof glass of the sedan's partition was up, sealing them in. Elara sat on one side of the vast leather interior. Her hands clenched so tightly her nails were biting into her palms. Dante sat opposite her, not beside her. He was a creature of shadow and ice, his face a mask of cold, remote fury. He wasn't her lover. He wasn't her partner. He was the Mafia Boss, and she was the liability he was driving to a liquidation. Elara's mind, usually a high-speed data analysis machine, was frozen. It was stuck on a single, terrible loop. Dante's protocol. He's going to hurt her. He's going to make me watch. He's going to retire her to Siberia. "She's my friend," she whispered, the words sounding pathetic and thin in the opulent, silent car. Dante's head snapped up. His gray eyes were flat. "She is a hostile agent. She targeted my portfolio, my family. She is no different from Anton." "She's everything different from Anton," Elara cried, her terror finally giving way to the lioness's fury. "She's not a criminal. She's a nerd. She's a good person who did a stupid thing because she thought her best friend had been murdered by a corporate raider." "Her intentions," Dante said, his voice a lethal, soft hiss, "are irrelevant. The result is the same. She has given a detective a subpoena. She has, in effect, signed his death warrant and possibly ours." "His death warrant?" "You are my chief strategist. Run the analysis, Elara. What do you think my only move is, now that a cop has a legitimate file on me? He has to disappear. The data has to disappear. And your friend, she is the source of the breach. She has to be sealed." The cold corporate language chilled her to the bone. Sealed. Like a forensic evidence bag. Like a tomb. "No," Elara said, and her voice was shaking. "No. Your way. Your protocol. It's messy. It's stupid." Dante's eyebrows shot up. The cold mask cracked, revealing a flicker of surprise. "It's stupid." "It's unoptimized," she snarled, her brain finally kicking into high gear. The terror was still there, a cold stone in her stomach. But the scientist was taking over. "You can't just liquidate a civilian and a cop. This isn't a Bratva dispute. This is the real world. You kill a cop, you don't get a subpoena. You get a task force, you get the FBI, you get your entire financial portfolio frozen by the federal government. You don't solve the data breach, you amplify it. You turn a local liability into a national one." She was panting, her eyes wide, her mind racing. Dante was silent. He was listening. The fury in his eyes was being replaced by that cold, calculating, analytical gleam, the one she knew from the lab, the one he'd had when he corrected her thesis. He was no longer her jailer. He was her colleague. "Go on," he said, his voice a low command. This is a corporate warfare problem," she said, pacing the small confines of the car. "Not a street war. You don't use a gun. You use lawyers and data." She held up one finger. "One, the Sarah front. Containment. I handle her. I go to her. Not your men. Me. I lie. I tell her it was a test, a due diligence protocol for a government cybersecurity contract, that she was the test, and that by going to the police, she's broken a federal non-disclosure agreement. I'll scare her. I'll tell her she's the one facing prison. I'll tell her she's the one who compromised a national security asset. She'll believe this." "Test?" Dante asked, his voice skeptical. "She's a scientist," Elara said. "She's brilliant. She's also arrogant. She'll believe her data analysis was so good it broke a real-world test. She'll be proud and terrified. She will sign anything I put in front of her. A retraction, an NDA, a sworn affidavit that her evidence was purely hypothetical. She will seal herself." A slow, dangerous smile touched Dante's lips. The alliance was forming. "That's containment. That is very good, but it's not enough. The data is already out. The detective has the file." "Two," Elara said, her mind on fire. "The Harding front. Destruction." "My specialty," Dante murmured. "No, my specialty," Elara corrected him. "You're thinking blackmail, mortgages, hostages, messy analog. You need to think like a CEO, like a hacker. This detective, he's just a man. He got a file full of complex financial data from Sarah. What did he do with it? He didn't just print it. He put it on his computer, his precinct computer. He probably emailed it to his personal account, or put it on a flash drive. He is a walking data security nightmare." Dante was now leaning forward, his cold fury completely gone, replaced by the hungry, predatory focus of the lioness's mate. "Elara, we don't go after the man, Dante," she said, her voice a low, excited whisper. "We go after the file. We do a hostile takeover of the 12th Precinct's server. We find that file. We find every copy of that file. And we don't just delete it." She smiled, a cold, sharp lioness smile. "We corrupt it. We optimize it. We change the data. We turn his evidence of racketeering into a file full of cat pictures. Or better yet, we rewrite his forensic report so it clears you. We make him look like the incompetent, paranoid fool who wasted the city's time. We don't just neutralize the threat, Dante. We discredit it, permanently." There was a long, heavy silence in the car. Dante just stared at her, his gray eyes incandescent with an emotion she couldn't... No. She could place it. It was the same look he'd had in the lab. It was the look he'd had at the Bratva dinner. It was pride. He finally leaned back, the tension in his shoulders gone. He was no longer her judge. He was her partner. "That," he said, his voice a raw, appreciative growl, "is the most vicious corporate strategy I have ever heard." The betrayal was still there, a thin, cold line between them, but the respect was a bridge over it. He flicked the intercom. "Leo." "Boss?" Leo's voice came back, flat. "Reroute. We're not going to the civilian's apartment. We're going to the central hub." "Yes, boss. And the asset? The friend?" Dante looked at Elara. He was asking her. "Pull your men off her," Elara said, her voice a command. "She's not a hostage. She's my problem. I'll call her. I'll set the meeting. My turf. My terms. You heard the Dottoressa, Leo, Dante said, a new dark amusement in his voice. Pull the security detail. We're changing the protocol. He flicked the intercom off and turned his full attention to Elara. The sedan was gliding through the night, a silent, black iron war room. A hostile takeover of a police precinct, he mused. That will require significant legal and technical assets. I'll need my team, Elara said, her CEO brain fully in command. The ones who built the Apex servers. My real team. Not your thugs. My hackers. They're yours, he said. And my attorneys. They will be very interested to see what a corrupted file does to a subpoena. The car descended into a private subterranean tunnel. The alliance was forged. The fight was over. The war was just beginning. Elara, he said, his voice quiet as the car rolled to a stop in a vast concrete bunker. She looked at him. The lie, he said, his voice tight. The betrayal. We are not done, but the Empire comes first, she finished for him, her voice just as cold. The Empire comes first. He got out of the car, a king. She got out after him, a queen. They walked side by side into the central hub, a true, terrifying, and united merger, ready to bring their full combined power down on one unsuspecting police detective. Chapter 15. The final move. The central hub was not a penthouse. It was a concrete and glass heart of darkness, buried 3 levels beneath Dante's downtown office tower. It was part corporate data security bunker, part Bratva war room banks of humming SaaS-based servers lined one wall, manned by Elara's real team, 3 pale, brilliant young hackers who looked like they'd never seen the sun, all of them now officially on the Apex clinical payroll. The other side of the room was Dante's world. Leo stood at a logistics board, mapping the 12th precinct, while armed Bratva soldiers, his asset protection team, monitored security feeds. It was the physical, terrifying merger of their 2 worlds. We're in, whispered the lead hacker, a young woman with pink hair named Kiko. The precinct's firewall is a joke. We are inside their internal network. Dante stood behind her, a black-suited shadow. Find Harding's terminal. Find the file. Working on it, Mr. Volkov, Kiko murmured, her fingers flying. He's a sloppy one. He emailed the entire forensic file to his personal Gmail. What a liability. We'll handle the Gmail account later, Elara said, her voice cold. She was in full CEO mode, dressed in a sharp black pantsuit, her hair pulled back. She felt like a general. Focus on the source, the file on his desktop, the one he's using to build his legal case. Got it, Kiko said. It's encrypted. A ES-256 encryption. He's not that stupid. We can't just access it, not without his password. Dante didn't even flinch. He looked at Leo. He's at his desk, now. Leo nodded. Yes, boss? Get him away from it, Dante ordered. How? How do you think? Dante's voice was ice. Create a logistical nightmare. A multi-car accident 3 blocks away. A bomb threat at the cafe across the street. Pull every cop in that building out onto the street. Now, Leo, go. Leo was gone. Dante turned back to Elara. The cold line of betrayal was still between them, but it was eclipsed by the hum of the operation. You have your diversion, he said. It will last maybe 20 minutes. Elara nodded, her face pale but set. It's time. I'll handle my front. He just looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable. Don't fail, Elara. I'm not a liability, Dante, she said, her voice sharp. I'm your queen. Start acting like it. She didn't wait for his reply. She turned and strode out, a king's ransom and asset protection falling in silently behind her. The cafe was a sterile, neutral ground acquisition, midway between the precinct and the lab. Anonymous. Sarah was already there. She looked like a ghost. Her hair was a mess, dark circles under her eyes. When she saw Elara walk in, flanked by two men who looked like they were carved from granite, she burst into tears of relief. "Elara! Oh my God, Elara!" She jumped up to hug her. Elara stopped her, her hand coming up. A cold, hard stop. Sarah froze, her arms half raised. "Elara." "Sit down, Sarah," Elara said. Her voice was not the voice of her best friend. It was the voice of the Dottoressa. The CEO. "What? What is this?" Sarah stammered, sinking back into the booth. The two guards stood by the door, their backs to the room. "This," Elara said, sliding in opposite her, "is a debriefing." She placed a thick, leather-bound legal folder on the table. "What? What did you do, Sarah?" I saved you," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "I got the police. That Detective Harding, he believed me. He's getting a warrant. We're going to get you out." "Get me out of what?" Elara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "My compensation package? My position as CEO of a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company? My penthouse? What exactly were you saving me from, Sarah?" From him! From Volkov. He's a criminal!" "He's my investor," Elara said, her voice like ice. "And you just compromised a federal investigation." Sarah's mouth dropped open. "What?" "The test," Elara said, leaning in. "The reason I got this job, the reason for the NDAs, the research I was doing for Volkov? It wasn't for us. It was for the Department of Defense, a new cybersecurity protocol. The lie was beautiful, it was simple, and it was aimed directly at Sarah's ego." "You, a DOD contract?" Sarah breathed. "Yes. And the evidence you found, the shell companies, the data analysis, that wasn't a crime, Sarah. That was the test, a honeypot, to see if our corporate security could be breached by an outside asset. And you magnificent, stupid idiot. You didn't just breach it. You blew it wide open." Sarah's face, which had been pale with fear, was now flushing with pride. I breached a DOD firewall?" "You breached everything," Elara snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "And then you handed your data, classified federal data, to a local police detective. Do you have any idea what you've done? That's not whistleblowing, Sarah. That is treason." The color drained from Sarah's face. Treason? "You've compromised a national security asset. You've put agents at risk. You are in so much trouble." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her whole body shaking. "Oh my God, Elara, I didn't know. I was just trying to help." "You can fix it," Elara said, her voice softening just a fraction. She pushed the legal folder across the table. "This is a non-disclosure agreement, retroactive. It states that your research was done as a consultant for Apex. It states that your findings were hypothetical data models for that cybersecurity test. It states that your report to Detective Harding was a misunderstanding, a false positive in the data." She opened the folder. "And this," she added, "is a severance package from Apex for your brilliant consulting work. It's $250,000 and a new job offer heading our R&D lab in Zurich." Sarah stared at the numbers, at the contract. This is a bribe," Sarah whispered. No, Elara said, her voice kind but dead. This is your life. This is the story. This is the protocol that keeps you out of a federal prison. She tapped the signature line. Sign it, Sarah, and fix your mistake. Sarah, shaking, trapped, and, underneath it all, proud, took the pen. She signed. She was contained. Elara took the folder. She stood up. Her old life was officially liquidated. I'll see you in Zurich, Sarah asked, her voice a small, hopeful squeak. Elara looked at her friend. The last civilian liability. My logistics team, she said, her voice flat, will be in touch to handle your relocation. She turned and walked out, not looking back. She strode back into the central hub. The air was thick with tension. Kiko was sweating. The diversion worked. He's out of the building, but I can't guess his password. I'm locked out. You don't have to guess, Elara said, her voice calm. She walked to the terminal. Dottoressa? What's his name? The detective. Harding. James A. Harding. Badge number. Irrelevant. Elara's fingers flew over the keyboard. She wasn't trying to breach the file. She was breaching his life. He's 45, divorced, 1 kid, a daughter. How do you? Dante asked, his voice a low growl of appreciation. Data analysis, Elara murmured. I ran my forensic file when you gave me his name. His daughter. Her name is Isabel. Birthday? October 25th. She typed, Izzy 1025. Access denied. No, he's a cop. He's vain. She typed, Harding 1025. Access denied. No, a password. A file. He's not just vain. He's righteous. She typed, Justice 1025. Access granted. The file opened. Sarah's entire, beautiful, devastating analysis. Kiko, Elara ordered. Yes, Dottoressa. Get rid of it. Delete? No. Elara smiled, a cold lioness smile. Replace it. I emailed you a file from the car. Harding_report_corrected.docx. Kiko's fingers flew. Uploading, replacing, corrupting the original, and done. The file is optimized. What did it say? Dante asked, his eyes locked on her. It's a full forensic report, Elara said, leaning back. Written by Detective Harding. It concludes that after a thorough investigation into Volkov asset management, his initial suspicions were found to be entirely baseless. It cites anomalous data from an unreliable civilian asset as the cause. It formally clears you, your LLCs, and Apex Clinical Solutions of all wrongdoing. It makes him look like an incompetent, overzealous fool. A slow, dangerous, and utterly proud smile spread across Dante's face. He looked at her. The cold line of betrayal not just gone, but vaporized. The Sarah front was contained. The Harding front was destroyed. They had won. Elara was shaking, the adrenaline crashing, the emotional cost of liquidating her best friend hitting her. Dante saw it. He didn't speak. He just walked to her. He put his hands on her desk, caging her in. Your protocol, he whispered, his voice a raw, low growl that vibrated through her, was vicious. It was flawless. It was perfect. The Empire comes first, she whispered back, her voice trembling. No, he corrected. He put a hand under her chin, tilting her face to his. The betrayal was gone. The respect. The awe. It was all that was left. The queen comes first. He kissed her. It was not a debriefing. It was not a negotiation. It was a coronation. It was the final, absolute merger of the boss and the lioness. And this time, the contract was sealed not in blood, but in fire. Chapter 16. The Empire. Epilogue. 1 year. 12 months was, Elara had discovered, the perfect incubation period for an empire. Tonight, the Apex Clinical Solutions Tower was a beacon of glass and light, a middle finger of steel and capital aimed at the heart of the city. The grand atrium, usually a sterile white marble expanse of corporate efficiency, had been transformed. Champagne flowed. A string quartet played. Hundreds of the world's most powerful people, pharmaceutical executives, venture capitalists, neurosurgeons, and regulators mingled, their voices a low, respectful hum. This was Elara's creation, the official launch of Project Lioness, the world's first synthetic, rapid-response hemostatic agent, the reagent she had used to save Misha, her invention. And she, Dr. Elara Hayes, CEO, chief strategist, and majority shareholder, was on the stage. She was not in a lab coat. She was not in a borrowed dress. She was in a custom-tailored gown of midnight blue silk, a dress that was not a sin, but a statement. It was the color of power, of a deep ocean, of a royal standard. Her hair was down, a dark, gleaming cascade. Her only jewelry was a simple, breathtaking diamond choker, a signing bonus, as Dante had called it. She stood at the podium, a single spotlight illuminating her. She was not the trembling, ficus-hiding researcher. She was not the panicked, adrenaline-fueled doctor. She was the queen. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice amplified by the mic, a calm, cool, and confident alto that commanded the entire massive room. For decades, trauma care has relied on the same basic protocols: pressure, gauze, tourniquets. We have sent men to the moon, but we still bleed to death in the same way our ancestors did. We treat the symptom. We never cure the liability. A few investors in the front row chuckled, loving the corporate buzzwords. Tonight, that changes. She gestured to the massive screen behind her. A complex, beautiful 3D data model of her synthetic peptide, her science witch magic, began to rotate. Apex Clinical is proud to announce the FDA fast-track approval of hemostasis. Not a drug, but a solution. A bioprogrammable agent that mimics and amplifies the body's own clotting cascade by over 900%. It doesn't just stop bleeding, it commands it to stop. She clicked a remote. A video played, a pre-recorded clinical trial, a liver, a severe trauma, a spray of the clear agent, and stasis. The bleeding just stopped. The room gasped. Our R&D, led by the brilliant Dr. Sarah Jenkins from our Zurich Research and Development Hub, has confirmed a 98% success rate in Phase 3 trials. Elara continued, her voice smooth. She'd kept her promise. Sarah, her friend, was now her highest paid, most closely watched, and most productive asset. She was thriving under the protection of a corporate security detail that was in reality a very polite, very permanent prison. The containment was total. We have already finalized logistical contracts with the Department of Defense, and our new supply chain will have hemostasis in every major trauma center in North America by the 4th quarter. This is the future of clinical medicine. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw Dr. Abelovich, her new head of surgical consulting, watching her with pure, unadulterated awe. She saw Misha, now her personal head of asset protection and unofficial food taster, standing by the main door, his suit straining, a proud, wolfish grin on his face. She even saw a man she vaguely recognized as the police commissioner, smiling and raising a glass, his department now one of the largest beneficiaries of the Volkov Police Benevolent Fund. Detective Harding, she'd heard, had taken an early retirement due to stress. His baseless case against Volkov, a black mark on his permanent record. The optimized file had worked perfectly. And then, she saw him. Dante Volkov was not in the front row. He was not on the stage. He was standing in the shadows of a mezzanine balcony, alone, leaning against a marble pillar. He was a creature of the dark, a king in his element, watching his empire. He wasn't looking at the screen. He wasn't looking at the crowd. His gray, predatory eyes were locked. Only on her. He was not her CEO. He was not her primary investor. In this room, she was the power. She was the face. She was the asset. And he was the man who had forged the weapon. He was the owner, the client, the shadow that gave the light its meaning. He slowly, almost imperceptibly, raised his glass to her. A silent toast. To the lioness. Elara felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated possession. Hers, for him, that was stronger than any pharmaceutical she could ever invent. She smiled, a true, brilliant lioness smile, aimed only at him. "We are just getting started," she concluded to the room. "Welcome to the future of health." The room exploded in a thunder of applause. An hour later, she'd escaped. She'd shaken the hands, accepted the accolades, and dodged the journalists. She'd made her way to the private balcony, the cold night air a balm on her flushed skin. The city glittered below, a sea of diamonds that she, finally, owned. She didn't have to look. She felt him. He emerged from the shadows of the doorway, the glass sliding shut behind him, sealing them in their own silent world. "Your presentation," he murmured, his voice a low velvet gravel at her back, "was adequate." Elara laughed, a low, throaty sound she wouldn't have recognized in herself a year ago. "Adequate? My stock options just tripled in value. Adequate is unoptimized praise, Mr. Volkov. My apologies, CEO Hayes." He was behind her now. He didn't touch her, but his heat, his presence, enveloped her. His signature scent, steel, soap, and that clean, expensive Dante smell, was more intoxicating than the champagne. It was, a flawless execution. Your Queen's Gambit was a resounding success. "I had a motivated investor," she said, turning to face him. He was magnificent, a black-suited god against the glittering backdrop of their city. "And what," he whispered, "is the bonus structure for a CEO who has just conquered the pharmaceutical world?" "I believe," she whispered back, sliding her hands up the lapels of his perfect suit, "that my consulting fees are now astronomical. I'm very expensive." "You are," he agreed, his hands sliding around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The silk of her dress was a whisper between them. "You are the most valuable asset in my entire portfolio, and my portfolio has also had a very, very good year." "Oh," she murmured, her fingers toying with his tie. "You've been restructuring?" "I've been optimizing," he corrected. "While you were dominating the legitimate world, I consolidated the other one. Your logistical models, your data analysis strategies, they work just as well for other kinds of shipments. Anton's old rivals? They're not rivals. They're subsidiaries. His supply chain are now my supply chains. The Bratva is no longer a power in this city, Mia. It is the power." She looked up at him, her mind, his perfect equal, grasping the true scale of what they had done. He had used her corporate strategy to acquire the entire criminal underworld. She had used his capital and power to acquire the entire biotech world. They hadn't just merged, They had conquered. So, she breathed, her mind reeling with the sheer, unadulterated power of it all. The science witch and the Bratva king. The lioness, he growled, and her pride. The ultimate hostile takeover, she finished, the final merger. He leaned in, his gaze fixed on her mouth. You're not just my chief strategist, Dottoressa. And you, she whispered, her lips parting, are not just my investor. He kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of the elevator, nor the fevered passion of their first night. It was the kiss of equals, of allies, of a king and his queen, alone on their throne, surveying the world they had built. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. She pretended to be a doctor to impress him, he murmured, his voice a raw, possessive rumble, for her alone. Elara smiled, her eyes fluttering shut as she pressed closer to him. Now, she whispered, the Mafia Boss works for her.